Dear audience, we should probably start. Please take your seats. Yeah. Your Excellencies, dear Alexandr, dear audience, our Ukrainian friends who have come all the way to participate in our event. So we have gathered today to mark 2 years since the full-scale Russian aggression in Ukraine. And the event is organized by Rondelli Foundation in cooperation with the Ukrainian Embassy with the support of Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. We met last year and 2 years ago as well when the aggression has just started. And many of you, both as panelists as well as represented in the audience, have been part of those discussions. It has been a difficult year, of course, mostly for Ukraine, but overall as well. We observed the international system entering a period of turbulences and uncertainties, devastating war in Ukraine, the conflict in the Middle East, tensions in the Indo-Pacific region. More and more, this is taking shape of a global struggle between the proponents of freedom and those of tyranny. Many in the West, in the peaceful democracies, did not expect that history will take such a dangerous turn once again. Now they are working to prepare themselves, but this inevitably takes time. Meanwhile, the other side is determined and aggressive, increasing military spending and sending the aggressive messages. It's clear that the struggle ahead is going to be hard. Ukraine has received the most severe blow so far, and the Ukrainian people have risen heroically to meet the existential challenge of Russia seeking to destroy Ukrainian statehood as well as Ukrainian national identity. Ukrainians repelled the attempt Russian blitzkrieg, and since then for 2 years have been fighting this bloody and exhausting war. By their resistance, Ukrainians protect their country and their people, but they also do much more than that. If Russia has been victorious, it will go on to satisfy its imperial ambitions beyond Ukraine too. Here in Georgia, we feel this very distinctly, but that feeling has transpassed Russia's threatened immediate neighbors and has become acute for European states as well. We owe a lot to the Ukrainian people and their resistance. Victorious Russia successfully rebuilding its empire would drastically change the whole global balance. This would be disastrous for Europe, but it would also have severe consequences in other parts of the world. All of us who wish to see democracy and freedom strong in our own countries and in the world need to do everything we can in ways big and small to help Ukraine in its struggle. This war has turned out to be long and hard, but Ukraine is demonstrating remarkable endurance and ability to keep up its resistance. It has been a difficult year, but Ukrainians are as brave as earlier, show the same heroism and determination not to give up. We must also have long-term endurance to help Ukraine and to defeat Moscow's attempt to subjugate its neighboring countries. Ukrainians need our help, and they need it now. This is not just the right thing to do, but it's also in strategic national interest of everyone. So as I mentioned, today's event is co-organized by us and Ukrainian Embassy, and this has become a tradition, and we have been doing that much earlier. We've started doing that than the full-scale aggression, the Crimea annexation, post-Crimea annexation period as well. And it is supported by Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, and I would like to say or express our gratitude to Marcel Rotting, director of South Caucasus FES office. Also, the Polish embassy has, as usually, contributed to this event by providing the speaker, facilitating to have a Polish speaker at the expert panel. So thank you, everyone, for cooperation and for support and for being with us at, I think, very important event. We have two panels today, the so-called ambassadorial panel and then the expert panel. And after that, there will be a screening of a documentary on Georgian volunteers in Ukraine, which is also made possible by FES support. And as far as I know, it has not been shown publicly in Georgia yet. Thus, stay with us. Thank you. And with this, I would like to give a floor to Chargé of the Ukrainian Embassy, to Alexandr Shulhan.
First of all, thank you, Eka, for organizing this event. I hope we will finish this tradition this year and won't be able to organize this such conference next year after Ukrainian victory. So, good afternoon, distinguished guests, dear friends, ambassadors, excellencies. 2 years ago, on February 24th of 2022, Russia initiated a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. This moment was preceded by 8 years of less intense Russian aggression. However, it is obvious and undeniable that the war against Ukraine commenced in February 2014, when Russia occupied the Ukrainian peninsula of Crimea and invaded the eastern regions of Donetsk and Lugansk. We must acknowledge that over the past 20 years, Russia has consistently challenged the resilience of the existing international security system. The aggression against Georgia in 2008 didn't receive a robust response, as well as the aggression against Ukraine in 2014. The full-scale invasion in February 2022 can be seen as a direct consequence of the failure to provide adequate support to the victims of the aggression that encouraged Russia to escalate its aggression further. Putin's attack in February 2022 was aimed at destroying the Ukrainian state within a matter of days and weeks. However, 2 years later, Ukraine remains resilient, continuing to stand its ground and fight back. Ukrainian forces have liberated more than half of the newly occupied territories, successfully breaking Russia's naval blockade by sinking nearly a third of Russia's Black Sea fleet. Furthermore, Ukraine has formed a global coalition enlisting the support of allies around the world. Currently, Russia shows no indication of halting its aggression, withdrawing its occupying forces from Ukraine, or actively seeking diplomatic resolutions. Putin persists in deploying thousands of troops into the battlefield, hoping to achieve some minor victories on the eve of his shameful elections scheduled for March. Since the onset of this full-scale invasion of Ukraine, over 390,000 Russian soldiers have lost their lives, alongside the destruction of thousands of tanks, artillery systems, cruise missiles, aircrafts, helicopters, and other military equipment. In revenge for its military losses on the battlefield, Russia continues terrorizing Ukrainian cities by targeting critical infrastructure and residential areas with missiles, MLRS, guided aerial bombs, and attack drones, resulting in significant casualties and widespread destruction. In 2023 alone, Ukraine endured over 6,000 air alerts. Since the outset of the full-scale invasion, more than 7,500 missiles, including 900 ballistic missiles and over 3,800 Shahed drones, have been deployed by Russia across Ukraine. The Kremlin persists in its efforts to dismantle Ukraine, demonstrated Moscow's unwillingness to engage in negotiations beyond the demand for the surrender of Kiev. Presently, there is no viable peace option with the Putin regime. The fakes about Russia's readiness for negotiations are nothing but a war trick within the Kremlin strategy. Its objective is to diminish support for Ukraine, foster doubts and contradictions among Kiev's allies, and buy time to prepare a new escalation. Ukraine will resist as it has done so far and will win. There is no alternative. The future of the international rules-based order is at stake. That's why President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky has initiated Peace Formula to address the urgent challenges of our time. The Peace Formula remains the singular, realistic and comprehensive plan to halt the war, restore Ukraine's territorial integrity and guarantee global security and justice. Its 10 points were reflected in the UN General Assembly resolution, UN Charter principles underlying a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine, adopted on the 23rd of February 2023 by 141 countries. In the short term, Ukraine must restore its sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. Looking ahead, it is imperative to prevent aggression from becoming normalized in the 21st century. No other countries desire peace more than Ukraine. However, Ukrainians also know that the path to true and just peace lies through success on the battlefield and expelling occupiers from the Ukrainian land. Victory in war requires two essential factors: endurance and military assistance. Ukrainians have demonstrated unwavering resilience, and it is crucial that our allies bolster military support. Otherwise, if Russia is not stopped in Ukraine, the cost of restoring order in the world will be significantly higher. There is no room for compromise with evil, because if Ukraine stops fighting, it will fall. The world as we know will fall. Only when Russia holds its aggression, the war will come to an end. The recent interview with the Russian dictator revealed once again the true motive behind the war, a classic Hitler-style land grab. Living in his own world, Putin is convinced that he has a legitimate claim to anything within the borders or zone of influence of the former Russian Empire. We witnessed an obsessed dictator discussing the division of countries and the redrawing of borders as his supposed historical entitlement. For Putin, this war has never been about Ukraine's neutrality, NATO enlargement, or protecting Russian speakers or any other false pretext. Instead, it is solely about territorial conquest, the subjugation of an independent nation, and undermining global security through the reshaping of borders in Europe. In January 1943, the allies of anti-Hitler coalition embraced the principle of unconditional surrender of Germany, which meant refusing to compromise with evil. Today, the conditions of the war dictate the similar logic. The Russian aggression can only be defeated, not negotiated with. Thank you for aggression. Oh, thank you for your attention.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, Dear Excellencies, Шановні пані та пановні, шановні друзі. These days, Russia's war against Ukraine will turn into its third year. 24th of February 2022 is a day that I'm sure no one ever will forget. And I'm sure every one of you can remember the feeling that you had on that morning, that restless night before. The first messages from friends and colleagues in Kiev. Back then I was working as FAS representative in Ukraine. They were hearing explosions. The feeling of helplessness, injustice, fear, and unbelievable anger. But also determination. It was this feeling of a united country, of collective fortitude, of enormous superhuman moral that let us know Ukraine will not give up. Ukraine will not fall. Ukraine will take up this fight, and Ukraine will withstand. It has been 2 years that the unthinkable became reality. 2 years that our continent is at war. 2 years that our Ukrainian friends and we together with them again and again had to pay farewell to beloved ones who became victims of Russia's invasion. Here in Georgia, people feel what that means, and people remember what that means. And also, people understand that the war will also determine Georgia's future in one way or the other. The fear in the early days that Georgia would also be the target of Russian aggression has, fortunately, not become truth. But given the Russian troop presence and the occupation of Georgian territory, we don't know what the future will bring. The uncertainty remains. And all the more, the task for Georgia and its people who show so much solidarity with Ukraine to stand together, to remain vigilant, but also to use the opportunity in this time of trials to lay the foundation of a European Georgia, the joint vision that connects Georgia with Ukraine. It is even more so that Georgians mark the biggest number of international volunteers fighting in the Ukrainian armed forces. We as FAS supported a documentary movie that inquires about their motivation and about their feelings. We are happy to show you that movie at the end of this day. These days there have been many concerns about developments in this war. While we all support Ukraine's fight for democracy and freedom, it is important to remember that this is not just a battle of ideologies. It is a complex geopolitical situation with very serious consequences for both sides. Unsurprisingly, time and time again, we must expect to hear disturbing news and to promptly see attempts to sow doubt among the public. However, it is crucial that we rely on logic and reason, rather than allowing ourselves to be swayed by emotions alone. Fear can cloud our judgment and lead us down dangerous paths. Recent developments in Russia's war against Ukraine have raised concerns among observers. The replacement of Ukraine's commander-in-chief has led to speculation about the impact on the morale of the Ukrainian troops and the effectiveness of their operations. Additionally, reports suggest that Ukraine may be running low on critical supplies such as ammunition, which could put them at a disadvantage in the ongoing fighting. Indeed, Ukraine is critically short on artillery ammunition, so much so that the Russians have managed to take Avdiivka after almost 10 years of fighting. Arguably, Ukraine never had enough ammunition, but now it has even less than before. In this regard, one must keep in mind whenever Ukraine has too little ammunition, it is suffering heavier casualties and losing terrain. The less ammunition it has, the more lives and territory it is going to lose. While the current ammunition shortage is a significant challenge, it is important to note that this is likely the lowest point in terms of availability. European countries are gradually increasing their production rates, which will eventually lead to a surplus of supplies for Ukraine. Furthermore, there are various potential scenarios in which the United States could hopefully resume aid to Ukraine, providing additional resources for the country's defense efforts. It is crucial to remain patient and supportive during these trying times, as the outcome of this war will have far-reaching consequences for global stability. It is perfectly understandable that after 2 years, many of us feel frustrated or despairing in light of recent setbacks. However, it is essential to channel these emotions productively. Together, we can work towards a resolution that upholds the principles of democracy and freedom. As we navigate through these difficult times, it is crucial to remember that Ukraine's fight is indeed also, to some extent, our fight. The struggle for democracy and equality extends beyond national borders, and we must stand united in our efforts to defend these values. It is natural to experience fear and despair in the face of adversity, but we must combat these emotions with facts, with logic and solidarity. We must also be vigilant against those who seek to undermine democratic principles in all our home countries. Above all else, let us remember that our collective action through advocacy and support for Ukraine, and in some countries this year also through voting, can make a meaningful difference in the world. Together we can emerge from this crisis stronger than ever before. Indeed, there have been dark times throughout history. Just think about the darkest hours of the Second World War in 1941 and 1942. Nevertheless, humanity has always emerged victorious in the end. As we face the challenges of today, let us draw strength from the lessons of the past and stand together for all that we hold dear. We may have obstacles to overcome, but with determination and unity, we will prevail. Slava Ukraini!
And now I would like to ask the panelists to take the seats. Please, there was not enough space. That's why we do not have a name tag, but it will be on the screen. That's however you feel more comfortable. No, I'll start. I'll start and is it okay? Yes, thank you, Ambassador, for joining. I was kind of worrying, looking for you. So we have moved to our the first session, and I'm really honored to be moderating this very distinguished panel of 8 ambassadors of Georgia's friendly countries and institutions. And let me welcome and thank Ambassador Mariusz Maszkiewicz for being with us, Ambassador of EU Paweł Herczynski, US Ambassador Robin Dungan, German Ambassador Peter Fischer, and I should say here that I was thinking, and this is the first time German ambassador is part of our events for a long, long time. So thank you, and hope this is not the last. And Ambassador of France, Sherez Gastri, Ambassador of Sweden, Anna Liberg, Ambassador of Czech Republic, Piotr Kubernat, and Andrews, our good friend. Thank you for coming. I know that you have been driving from Western Georgia. So we have 8 speakers and hour and 15 minutes to fit everything together, but I kind of warn organizers that there is no way to do that, though I'll try to do my best. I was thinking to go directly to the speakers, and I'll use the list which was initially, and would like to, you to comment on the assessment of the last year or vision for the future. What else can be done currently to get more help to Ukraine as it fights its Russia's offensive right now? Also, whatever you would like to comment, about 5-6 minutes, and I'll try also to squeeze my questions in between, which you are, welcome to incorporate or, So thank you, and Ambassador Dungan, let's start with you. So the United States has been providing invaluable assistance to Ukraine from the very start of the aggression, and its commitment has never been under the doubt. But of course we want to hear that from you. And as the congressional decision is on hold up right now, and as Ukraine needs this assistance currently, urgently, are there any mechanisms that President Biden instruments can apply to provide that necessary help? So the two, US commitment and whether there are the instruments available. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me? Great. Thank you, Eka. Thank you to the Rondelli Foundation, Alexander, to you and the embassy, and also to the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung Foundation for inviting us all here today. I think maybe I will get to your question, but I want to back up to the run-up to the war, where we all were 2 years ago. I was at the time at the State Department working as the Deputy Assistant Secretary covering Ukraine. And I remember very vividly the weeks and months, late 2021, November, December, January, in the run-up to the war, where we had increasing intelligence showing us what Russia was planning. As Russia was moving military installations on all 3 sides of Ukraine, we were sharing that intelligence with our allies. And the truth is, many people, including in the United States, didn't believe Putin would do it. And those who thought he would do it, many thought that he would, within a matter of weeks, get to Kyiv, decapitate the government, install his own puppets. And that was sort of the prevailing thought, that it would all be over fairly quickly if indeed it did happen. But that didn't happen. And what we saw is Ukrainians did not capitulate. Rather, they fought harder, longer, and more resiliently than anybody could have imagined. President Zelensky did not flee the country. Rather, he stayed and he led with incredibly impressive valor. The West was not fractured. Rather, we became more united than ever, and committed to supporting Ukraine. Many thought NATO would be weakened, but instead NATO became stronger, more unified, larger by one, and I hope very soon by two, better funded, arguably stronger than it's ever been. And what we did is we worked really hard to build a coalition of more than 50 countries to support Ukraine day in and day out over the last 2 years. We've provided thus far $75 billion worth of assistance to Ukraine, the United States. There are some who think that the United States is the only country provided that kind of assistance, but I will leave it to my EU colleagues and European colleagues to dispel that myth, because in fact, Europeans have provided more than $100 billion in assistance, in addition to hosting millions of Ukrainian refugees. So the world and our global partners beyond Europe, more broadly, partners, Japan, South Korea, many, many others, have really stood behind Ukraine. And what's become of Russia? I mean, Russia is more isolated than ever. More than 140 nations in the United Nations have voted time and time again, 4 times, to condemn its actions. Russia's become reliant on countries like Iran and North Korea, and when those are your best friends, it's not a good place to be. Putin seems to be willing to drive his country into a deeper state of economic disarray, economic isolation. The impact of the sanctions that we've put in place, I think time will tell in the future just how devastating on the economy of Russia they will be. And we've seen what's happened to the military. So here's what I want to actually turn to, what Ukraine, the prospects for Ukraine, because there has been a lot recently in the press about changes in the administration, recent territorial setbacks. But really, Ukraine has retaken more than 50% of the territory seized by Russia. It's pushed Russia's Black Sea fleet out. It's managed to get more grain on world markets. Remarkably, Ukraine's economy grew by 5% last year. It's time and time again, Ukraine and the Ukrainians have shown the world what you can do when you're fighting for your freedom. And Ukraine has done a lot for us. I think we all recognize, most of us recognize, that the bravery and resilience of the Ukrainians in fighting this war, they're fighting not just for their freedom, but for ours. Ukraine has dealt a significant blow on Russia's military strength. Without putting a single American or NATO soldier into combat, we've helped destroy 50% of Russia's ground forces, ground combat power, 20% of its Black Sea fleet. Ukraine has taken off the battlefield 21 naval ships, 102 Russian aircraft, 22,700 Russian tanks, a significant blow to Russia's military strength. And I think that we've all shown, and Ukraine's shown, that the world isn't going to stand by and let Russia tear apart what we've all committed to in the UN Charter, and that the world's democracies will be committed to defend our values. So turning to our assistance, I think many of you know that we have a $60 billion supplemental request before our Congress. The Senate has passed that request, and it's now with our House of Representatives. I am very optimistic that that will be passed by the House. And the reason I'm optimistic is when I was in that previous job, I spent many, many, many hours in Congress talking to members and their staffs about the war in Ukraine and about the U.S. commitment. And there was extremely strong, and still is extremely strong, bipartisan support for Ukraine and for supporting Ukraine. So right now we are going through a legislative process. I will let Congress do its work, but I'm very optimistic that we will pass the supplemental funding request. I want to say that, probably about a year into the war, I visited Ukraine, and it was right around the time that the Russians had started hitting energy infrastructure. And you could really see the human toll it was taking with people living in the cold and the dark. We met with dozens of internally displaced persons, children who hadn't seen their fathers in months, people who were working out of cold, basements going down, as was mentioned, time and time again, when the sirens went, and then many, many people who'd lost loved ones, friends, family, husbands, brothers, sisters. And I think we always have to continue to remember the human cost of this war. Because sitting from here or elsewhere, sometimes it's possible to forget. And I think the stakes are high for Georgia too. We all know that. So I want to just end with a few words about Georgia, which is the Georgian government has supported Ukrainian refugees here, which we appreciate, has stood up for Ukraine in international fora, in the United Nations, OSCE, and other fora, has committed to stopping circumvention of sanctions, letting equipment get to Russia. Because I think Georgia knows just the critical, how critical it is to be occupied by Russia and what it means for your sovereignty and territorial integrity. So I'll end there, and I hope that wasn't over 5 minutes, but thank you. I'm really hopeful that we are going to do the right thing and that we'll be getting $60 billion more to Ukraine soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. And we also, all of us, I'm pretty sure in this audience, share your positive position regarding the outcome of the congressional decision. And we are really hopeful of that good news. Ambassador Herchinsky, now let's turn to you. It has been a really important year last year for Ukraine-EU relations. The EU made a decision to start the accession talks, which is a great achievement in my opinion. Also, you've managed to agree on this 50 billion package of assistance, so important economic assistance. I mean, so just recently the agreement was reached about the 13th package of sanctions. So it all talks about how impressive the EU performance is. But this is a brutal war, and it requires huge industrial capacity and funds associated with that. All of us understand that, and it's not kind of, we are not naive. And we know that there are talks going on within the EU as well, the G7, about the possibility of using the frozen Russian assets. And there are about 300 billion euros, mostly in the EU capitals. And there was recently the legislation concerning the interest, but this is a minor fund. So can you address also in your opening remarks the possibility of reaching the decision on that? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eka. Many thanks to organizers, to the Ukrainian Embassy, Rondelli Foundation, Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. Let me start, before I go into answering your questions, by stating loud and clear that the European Union and our member states stand united in our unwavering support to Ukraine in the face of Russia's brutal, unprovoked and unjustified aggression. This war is not only about Ukraine, it's not about Ukraine and Russia. What is being tested are international rules, UN Charter, and key principles of international law. EU support to Ukraine is not a promise, but a reality. To date, overall assistance from the EU and our member states amounts to almost 90 billion euro, out of which 28 billion is military assistance. For European Union, this is truly unprecedented. You asked the question about Russia's frozen assets. Political decision to transfer so-called windfall profits, namely the interest rates from those assets, for the purpose of reconstruction of Ukraine has been already taken, and discussions on actually doing the same with the money itself is ongoing. It's not an easy discussion. As you know, European Union works by unanimity. All 27 EU member states have to agree. I sincerely hope that this moment will come. And what I really want to underline is that at the beginning of this month, our leaders, by unanimity, have decided to spend 50 billion euro for additional help up to 27 in order to keep Ukraine state running. As we all know, the military situation remains extremely difficult and we need to scale up our military support. We need to give Ukraine what it takes to liberate its territory. We need to give Ukraine ammunition advantage, more long-range missiles, air superiority, more drones, and more military training. There is capacity, industrial capacity in the European Union. We are working very hard in order to increase it by 40%. And I sincerely hope that by the end of this year, we will deliver 1 million rounds of ammunition to Ukraine, 1 million shells, as promised by our leaders. Our military training mission has reached the target of 40,000 trained personnel, and from now until summer, we will train an additional 20,000. War crimes. This is very important. Another track where we need to make sure that the crimes committed will not go unpunished. The other very important element is the battle of narratives. And I know that we are here in Tbilisi. The battle of narratives is going on worldwide, including in Georgia. The perception of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine in the rest of the world will be decisive in isolating Putin and making our sanctions work. What else can we make to force Russia to retreat from Ukraine and prevent this war developing into a frozen conflict? We need to support Ukraine's peace formula, sometimes called the 10 points of Zelensky. Restrictive measures, we need to make sure that not only EU, like-minded partners, G7, but also other countries join as much as they can. This also applies to Georgia. And last but not least, Ukraine's integration into the European Union. This can contribute to increasing European security and limiting Russia's imperialist ambitions. While Ukraine is fighting a war, it has managed to complete 4 out of 7 steps set out in 2022 opinion on Ukraine's membership application. The constitutional justice reform, the selection of the High Council of Justice, the anti-corruption program, progress against money laundering, important measures to curb oligarchs' grip on public life, new media law, progress on national minorities. All this sounds very familiar. Ukraine is fighting a war, and in parallel, they manage successfully to implement all these reforms. This should be an inspiration to the authorities of Georgia. And my final words, as Robin shared some personal remarks, I had a huge privilege of visiting the front before the large-scale invasion. It was in 2016. I was part of a trip of 27 EU ambassadors. We took a train from Kiev. We went to the last station, which was Krematorsk. And then we saw the soldiers, the Ukrainian soldiers. And I remember, all of us had tears in our eyes. What I remember are their shoes. Every soldier had a different pair of shoes. These were, private shoes, not uniform. but they were all very tired and extremely committed. Extremely committed. And on the way back from the front line, we were on a bus going to Kharkiv to stay overnight. And at the front of the bus, we had 3 Ukrainian guides, ladies, young ladies. So we were moving away from the front towards Kharkiv, and on the empty highway, there was a column going towards the front with mostly civilian trucks improvised into armored vehicles with soldiers sitting on the top of those trucks. And I saw those 3 Ukrainian ladies, those 3 local guides that were sitting at the front of our bus, how they were cheering those soldiers that were going to the front. And for me, it was clear that with such attitude, with such emotions, with such conviction, there's no way Ukraine is not to win this war. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for sharing with us your position and these emotions. This is, I think, very, very important. And here with Georgia, in Georgia, we are definitely, at least public, are inspired by, watching the heroism of Ukrainians, both at battlefield as well as the strive in direction of the reforms. And, this, of course, we have not experienced at such an extent, but those connections with the wars that we have gone through, both in 90s, and it's not quite often mentioned, but we were watching those young people, volunteers, dressed in different type of clothes with different shoes, not as equipped for the war. We were also cheering, and we were hopeful for the for the better future. Thus, this resembles a lot, and it resonates a lot within the Georgian public. Thank you. And now let's move to Ambassador Lieberg. So the Russian aggression in Ukraine has kind of affected Sweden a lot, and it has reviewed its security policy and has abandoned the long-lasting neutrality. And by the end of this month, hopefully, you will become the NATO member as well, and there will be end to this story. So also we are hearing your military chiefs, people responsible for your civil defense, talking about the possibility of a war, warning Swedish population about the possibility of a war. So these are very new relatively developments for Sweden. And we see how Sweden, along with other North Atlantic nations, is preparing for long-term resistance against the Russian geopolitical ambition. So if you can comment on that, the transformation, strategic transformation of the Swedish society.
Thank you, Eka, and warm thank to the organizers for this event, and thank you for inviting us and for having this very important discussion here today. So we are entering the 3rd year of Russia's war on Ukraine, a brutal aggression, and as already stated here on stage, Russia's aggression is not only a violation of one nation's sovereignty and territorial integrity, but it's also an assault on our common security, our shared values, and the most fundamental rules and principles of international law. And we all know how this war develops and how it ends will have a profound impact on security, not only not only in Europe, and there are fundamental and long-term consequences of this war, and the outcome will not only define the future for Ukraine, but also for Europe and the West for a long time. And let also me underline that the courage shown by the Ukraine people in the face of aggression commands the utmost respect. So supporting Ukraine and defending Ukraine's independence, the sovereignty and territorial integrity is of fundamental importance. And again, not only for Ukraine's future, but for all of us. And the support for Ukraine is also, for these reasons and others, a long-term priority for the Swedish government, and Sweden will continue to provide political, humanitarian, military and economic support for Ukraine as long as it takes. And the government today considers support to Ukraine in the coming years to be Sweden's foremost foreign policy task, because we are also now facing a situation where Russia's aggressive actions have led to a greatly deteriorated security environment in Europe, and Russia has time and again displayed its willingness to use military force and accept high risk to achieve its goals. And therefore, I mean, we see that there is a need, and it requires that EU and NATO member states stay united and coordinated. We are stronger together, and our unity is also our greatest strategic asset. So a strong transatlantic link and a close EU-NATO cooperation remains essential for the European security. And there we see we need to increase our political, economic and military support for Ukraine. We need to further increase the pressure on Russia with sanctions and other restrictive measures. But we also need to deepen our engagement with the countries in the Eastern Partnership. And the decision in December by the EU leaders to open up accession negotiations with Ukraine was very welcome. And of course, Ukraine's path to EU membership is of great importance. It is also in the EU interest to assist, of course, Georgia and Moldova on their path, because this EU enlargement is really a geostrategic investment. And through its support to Ukraine, the EU has also shown its readiness to shoulder responsibility for European security, and the support has been historically forceful. But also the EU needs to stay committed and provide long-term support to Ukraine, guided by the needs of Ukraine. But then, I mean, coming back to the question also of strategic transition and the paradigm shift, this is all the background and framework for it. But for Sweden, this new reality has forced us to reflect on how we best defend and protect our open and democratic society. And I mean, we are all here aware of the major geopolitical challenges that we are facing. But a central starting point, of course, is that Russia will constitute a serious threat for Sweden and the security for a foreseeable future. And the answer to many of our challenges lies in close cooperation with those partners and allies that share our commitment to the rules-based international order. So Sweden has concluded that we are best defended within NATO. And applying for NATO membership on May 18th, 2 years ago, was really a historical step for our country. As was pointing out, we were leaving behind more than 2 centuries of military non-alignment, entering a new foreign and security policy identity. So it really constitutes a paradigm shift for us. But we believe that with Sweden in NATO, Sweden will be stronger, and Sweden will be safer, and NATO will be stronger. And Sweden will be a reliable, loyal and engaged NATO ally, and Sweden is ready. But also let me come back to the support for Ukraine, because what we see the best we can do is to continue our support for Ukraine. And the Swedish government recently presented its largest ever military support package to Ukraine. And since February 2022, Sweden has supported Ukraine with 3.2 billion euros, and this will continue to be a priority, because by supporting Ukraine, we do not only stand up for democratic values and the rules-based international order, but it's really also an opportunity to restrict Russia's scope for action. So, as was already pointed out, Ukraine soldiers are also fighting for our security, and that is also why the support must continue for as long as necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you a lot, Ambassador. And now let's move to German Ambassador, Ambassador Fischer. And again, I'm really happy to have you on board with us. So Germany has been greatly increasing its role as a crucial country for the defense of the NATO's eastern flank. And it has also been the largest provider of military aid to Ukraine after the United States. And yes, I think I'm correct. Yes, in that. And also, we see, we hear, watch, listen to Chancellor Scholz before Munich and at the Munich conference talking about the need to deter Russia, about speeding up the military spending. So if this is a correct to say, we see Zeitenwende in action, real changes occurring. And like recently, there was a discussion in the German parliament regarding the long-range missiles. And Ambassador Herczynski mentioned that the need of sending to Ukraine longer-range missiles, as well as, US has been mentioning. And so Stoltenberg, just recently, I was trying to remember, Stoltenberg just recently said that Ukraine has the right to strike Russian targets outside Ukraine, that this is within international law. So, having all this background, when will Germany reach the point of sending Taurus to Ukraine?
Thank you very much. So thanks to all the organizers, especially Embassy of Ukraine. I'll say some general words. I will try to approach your question. I can't answer it. I'll say that right away. I don't know when. And maybe I'll share a personal impression also from this war. So, I mean, everything has been said. Russian war of aggression is not acceptable, cannot stand. Russian troops must retreat from Ukrainian territory. There will be a peace at some point, but it cannot be a so-called diktat peace that Russia imposes on Ukraine. That's why all of us here are supporting Ukraine. And if not just this panel, but the countries, the states, the organizations we represent, I do recall Marcel Rüttich's words and agree with them. We can draw strength from history. Last week I happened to be in Frankfurt on Main. 70% of the old town was destroyed in 2 evenings of bombardment. And now that's history. So one day there will be a free Ukraine without Russian troops, but we have to get there, and the price is high and much too high. If for Germany this attack changed a lot, you talked about change, we call it Zeitenwende. The best translation is probably watershed moment, change in epochs, and it led us to give up our misunderstanding, I would say, some would say our illusion, that by having some elements of cooperation with Russia, we can achieve some kind of stability, which is in the mutual interest, and which will prevent something very bad from happening. It turned out that we had this kind of cooperation, we had confidence building, we had strong economic ties, we offered Russia everything, economic ties, cooperation in building a modern state, and so on and so forth. And Putinist Russia decided to throw all that away for this concept, which doesn't fit into our rationality at all anymore, I just call it Russian Earth. You can call it many things. Part of that was, I will control Ukraine, and if I can't, I will attack it militarily. Threw all this out of the window, and that led us to realize we need to change our policy towards Russia, and we call it watershed moment. And it's very significant for our policy towards the European Union enlargement, because the idea behind enlargement is now no more gray areas in Europe. No more areas where bad actors can use their malign influence to fight against democracy and rule of law institutions, and can fight against an international order which is based on international law, principle of self-determination, and the principle of not changing borders by force. So any country that reasonably, geographically, and in terms of civilization can be said to be part of Europe, and that says we wish to join the European Union, we should do that now and accelerate. And Pavel mentioned Georgia is also, affected and benefiting from this watershed moment. Now, Germany or Ukraine can count on Germany for as long as it takes. Our German politicians have been using this English phrase. We have supported by 30 billion. That's over 30% of the 90 billion that the EU has mentioned. Was it last week? On 16th of February, Ukraine and Germany signed a bilateral agreement which covers 10 years. And it's truly historic. Some German commentators have said for the first time in modern German history, Germany is some kind of a guarantee state. So 10 years it covers. It builds on the NATO agreement that came before, and it covers military, but it also covers the whole development of Ukraine as a modern state on its way into the European Union. Military aid for 2024, we have new commitments of 7.1 billion euros and 6 billion, they're called like budget commitments for the years after that. So that's slotted in as a baseline. The 30 billion we've given, of course, covers humanitarian, economic, catastrophe help, and so on and so forth. I should mention that Germany has received over 1 million Ukrainian refugees, the largest country, or the largest influx to any country after our Polish neighbors. And we're also looking to the time after the war, because there will be. And in June this year, we'll be hosting the Ukraine Recovery Conference in Berlin, which also aims to coordinate and to raise funds for civilian reconstruction. So really, it's a difficult time. I share what Robin said about the military situation. There's kind of a tendency now to say Ukraine is not doing well and has suffered some defeats, but Ukraine has actually achieved some kind of military victories, important ones that shouldn't be neglected when looking at this, because of course Putinist Russia bets on decreasing support, decreasing resilience, uses disinformation to feed their narrative. So we have to be aware of it and resist it. Russia is losing. Russia will lose more. The sanctions, unfortunately, take time to bite, but the Russian economy is now a wartime economy, which means it circulates around weapons productions and social transfer. It's not a real thing, and sanctions, when we make sanctions, flows go around the sanctions, so we call it maintenance sanctions. We have to stop the flow, and Russia will feel the bite even more with best friends like Iran and North Korea, good luck in providing for your own citizens. And Russia is also losing, people mentioned the courage and the valor of Ukrainian citizens, Ukrainian soldiers, because the Ukrainian soldiers know what they're fighting for. They're defending their homeland, they're defending their way of life. They have a just cause. And by and large, just causes tend to win in wars, and unjust causes don't. And my final reflection, I was in the United Arab Emirates before coming here, and it was the time of Expo 2020, which actually happened in 2021 and 22 because of COVID. And there was a Ukrainian pavilion, and the war began, and the Expo management said, please, no political demonstrations on the Expo grounds. But the Ukrainian pavilion, I went to visit I think a few days after the war began. It turned immediately from promoting, startups and Ukrainian agriculture and innovation to a, how shall we say, a place of solidarity with Ukraine, and visitors were invited to post yellow post-its. And it was a sea of yellow post-its from people all around the world, hundreds of thousands. You couldn't read them, and the impact was very strong. And it wasn't a political demonstration, but it just showed people around the world support the just cause. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, also for sharing your view on the security agreement that I was actually, yes.
I just say about the
Yes,
long-range missiles.
Yes, will be
you know,
nice.
sorry, I forgot that one. It's important. So, in Germany, we have a coalition government, and it's not a secret that two parties in the coalition government are in favor of sending the so-called Taurus. That's the one that we're talking about now. One party, which happens to be the larger party and party that, how do you say, supplies the chancellor, and I don't know where Marcel Rüttig is right now, he's affiliated, is still careful. But the chancellor once said, and I agree with this, our job is to limit this war and end it, not to expand it. And I think by and large, being careful in a wartime situation is a good guidance. So we will work this out. We had the discussion about the Leopard tanks. We had the discussion about the Iris-T missiles. But in the meantime, they are in Ukraine. We will work this out, but we are careful.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's working. Okay, so Ambassador Gasri, so we have reached France. It's a long step. So Ambassador Fischer was just talking about the security agreement pact signed between Germany and Ukraine, and that the same day President Macron has signed the same type of agreement with President Zelensky, and this is kind of fulfilling of pledge that was given by G7 countries at the Vilnius summit. Instead of giving again I'm being Georgian here, instead of giving the clear path to NATO. And UK, Germany, and France have signed those treaties. So can you tell us what does it mean for France's Eastern policy, and what is the significance of this pact? And is it a step towards NATO?
Okay, now I think it works. So thank you, Rondelli Foundation and Embassy of Ukraine for organizing this panel, and I will try to be not too repetitive because I obviously agree with everything my colleagues have said in this panel. I think it's our first and most important strategy is our unity and our coordination. And that's what the security agreement you are talking about also demonstrates, because it was signed the same day as the one signed with Germany. A security agreement is prepared also by Italy. It has been announced yesterday, and it follows UK's signature, also following up the G7 meeting in the margins of the Vilnius summit. And it's obviously a security agreement to prepare for the Euro-Atlantic integration of Ukraine, as this 10-year security agreement is supposed to finish when Ukraine joins NATO. And in any case, 10 years, and it provides for support on many fronts, not only military, but I must say that on military front, it provides for supply of military equipment and even for production, joint production of military equipment of high technology. And I think it's the best illustration for us of the long-term commitment to support Ukraine, and also on the coordination that we put with all our partners, NATO, G7, EU, and even beyond. And we are convinced, we have this certainty that our support is credible only if it's coordinated and only if it's in the long term. And I think also another very good example of our determination to support Ukraine in the long run is the EU integration process, its speed. And I think under French presidency of the EU, in the first semester of 2022, we've been very active in making sure that Ukraine gets candidate status, and now we are advancing very fast, and I'm hopeful that we'll open negotiation after the report in March, based on what Pavel said on the tremendous progress that Ukraine has made when it comes to their condition, and I hope that will be an influence on Georgia as well. I want maybe to go back to one point that some of my colleagues insisted in, is the idea that the narratives and the idea that long-term only plays for Russia, and in a way that only Russia can win the war in the end, and that as long as Ukraine has not won, then Russia is winning. I think that 2 years after operation that was supposed to last 1 month, we can see it's wrong. Ukraine is still standing, it's united, its partners are determined and united. Ukraine has registered successes in the Black Sea and in Crimea, which is symbolic. And even though the situation is difficult, obviously it was never meant to be easy. The plan of Russia is not working. Russia is showing signs of weaknesses. We can see with the getting rid of political opponents recently, and also with the tremendous cost of the war, the human cost for Russia, in a country that was already declining since the 19th when it comes to demography. I think it's an important internal threat for Russia, the war that they are waging against Ukraine. Third point maybe I wanted to make, going back to why we are supporting Ukraine, it's not because they are the victim of Russian imperial fantasies, but also because what is at stake in Ukraine is our own security as European. And you know, coming from a country whose president said a few years ago that NATO was brain dead, now we are participating, contributing to the deterrence posture of NATO on the eastern flank, I think we say. We have 2,000 soldiers in missions in Romania and Estonia, and we are participating in the Baltic, 2 different patrol missions. And we can observe from there that Russia has been much more aggressive, also towards us, not just towards Ukraine. Yesterday, my Minister of Defense disclosed to the public that 1 month ago, a French plane was threatened to be shut down by Russia while patrolling in the international airspace in the Black Sea. We see since the aggression of Ukraine that Russia has entered a new phase of aggression also in the hybrid warfare. Disinformation, interference, cyber attacks are becoming more systematic, more methodic, more coordinated with Russian official statements. It's happening in France, it's happening also in Europe. Maneuvers to destabilize our countries, our democracies, to divide us, to influence our public opinion that we should abandon support to Ukraine, and it's happening when we come closer to important election, and we have European elections in June. I know I'm in a country where we are used to Russian disinformation, and that Georgia can understand how it's important to defeat these attacks, and we are really determined also to fight this war with our partners, and recently in a Weimar, what we call Weimar format, so the meetings of Polish, German and French Minister for Foreign Affairs, we have decided to create an early warning response mechanism when it comes to disinformation and cyber attacks. Also, I want to finish with saying something that Russian aggression has been a wake-up call for Europeans when it comes to improving our defense and security. France has always felt like preaching in the desert when calling for a more robust Europe, able and ready and willing to defend its own security without relying on anyone. And I think that now it's not thanks or because of the very argumentative and convincing statements of the French officials, but thanks to the war in Ukraine that we are realizing that we have to choose strategic autonomy when it comes to energy, to defense, to security, to strategic technology, and we are taking steps to do that. Of course, it will take some time, but I think that recently we had many important meetings at the highest level of European officials to go that direction. The Commission is supposed to deliver a defense industry strategy to strengthen our defense capabilities. We are talking about a defense commissioner in the next Commission, statements by Commissioner von der Leyen. We are also thinking of EU bonds to bolster our security industries. So we are really determined to have EU boost its defense and security, not as an alternative to NATO, but as an element of this alliance and a strategic component of NATO. I think we are all convinced that the cost of supporting Ukraine is nothing compared to the cost of Russia winning the war, and we will do everything to defeat Russia. And maybe finishing with a personal also experience, as everyone is saying, what he was doing during the start of the invasion. I was personally a political coordinator in the Security Council of the United Nations in New York, and we were precisely having a meeting on peace and security and threat to Ukraine, in a meeting chaired by Russia and its Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs, who was swearing that Russia had absolutely no intention to invade Ukraine, and then at the very same time we were all receiving messages that it was happening. So I think we are convinced that we cannot trust Russia. I think Georgia knows it even better than us and before us, and we'll do, as I said, everything to support Ukraine.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for sharing with us your views, and especially, I like this sentence, not Ukraine winning, but defeating Russia. Because unless Russia is defeated strategically, things won't change. And again, this is, what we feel in our blood. Sometimes maybe it's, we are kind of irritating everybody, mentioning and talking and repeating all of that, but that is how we feel here, this country. And I think also that, many of you have mentioned these propaganda narratives. And I think that this type of gathering is exactly countering the narratives, explaining what each country and who does what and how the solidarity is strong as 2 years ago, currently as well. So that is not, quite important, I think, sharing your views in front of the Georgian public, and this also has the aim to counter the narratives which are widespread in our country as well. Thank you. And now, Andrius, Ambassador Kalindra, thank you for driving all the way. I don't know from where, but I know that you've really tried to get here in time. And it's not even a question, probably. So during January, February, we were hearing from from the leadership of many European countries and from military chiefs. And as Georgians, again, emotional people, we were taking that quite seriously, that everyone was warning their nations about the possibility of a war and Russian aggression becoming real. And at the same time, then we are also watching the Russian propagandists talking about, sending out aggressive messages, not to say anything about Medvedev, threatening many nations, and specifically about the Baltic states, saying that this is, it belongs to Russia. So how you Lithuanians feel in all this, ping pong of, different rhetoric, and what do you think, maybe it's a rhetorical question, but what do you think NATO policy should be right now to deter that from happening?
Thank you very much, everyone. And, 2 years ago, Mr. Zelensky said, I don't need a right, I need ammunition. And let me just very much to remind it. We are, after 2 years, this is same topic, I don't need a right, I need ammunition, is as never before very much essential. And while we're talking about the narratives, about the strategic communication, we're spending millions of euros to counteroffense that strategic propaganda by Russia, etc. But to some extent, the best medicine to offsetting this propaganda is a good policy. And the question I have today, do we have a right and good policy right now that suits to our interest? I'm very sorry to be not very much diplomatic today, because I don't see space to be diplomatic today after this 2 years of ongoing aggression. And what do we mean by good policy right now is a military support. That's same just to respond to Mr. Zelensky's call. Because Putin has no intention to stop. Have you seen, dear colleagues, yesterday's interview of Mr. Medvedev? Have you read? Have you looked at it? At the body language? How it was presented? At the content? So no any signs that Putin is about to stop. And to some extent, sometimes right now we choose a mode of the de-escalation. De-escalation on what price? Of the bombings against Ukrainians, families, children, rapes, everything? Is it indeed the de-escalation that we do support by not making an action that is desperately needed? As it was said, the situation is very, very bad, but not critical. Let's not allow that the situation will become critical, because that will be working. Oh, because if it's going to be critical, then it will be much more costly to all of us. And why it is so important? Because definitely, as it was mentioned, the Putin is fighting the democracies. And why it is so important? Because democracies do not fight among themselves. democracies do not fight. So that's why just we have to invest in the democratic space. Would be Georgia, would be Ukraine, would be Baltic states, would be transatlantic partnership, because democracies that ensures the real safety and real prosperity. As Russia is not recognizing any borders, would be moral borders, would be intellectual borders, would be territories. So we just need to decouple from Russia and Belarus. Our economy is bleeding. We have minus 0.3 of GDP drop last year. And the answer is, of course, 1.7 GDP we provided to Ukraine, to support Ukraine, including militarily. Since the June last year, we have 0% of the Russian gas, oil. We have a refinery in Lithuania, 0% of oil, 0% of electricity. And we're ready to pay that price, just to stop Russia's aggression if it's possible, until it's not late. And just by concluding, once again reminding that I don't need a right, I need ammunition. And this does not have any links with the eventual call to open the second front. This is not about it. This is just to support Ukraine, to preserve, to contain their territories and sovereignty and will for the future, unless it has not become critical. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrews. Thank you. And Ambassador Mashkevich, finally we are here. And on every occasion during last year's discussion or 2 years ago or at any meeting with my Polish colleagues or friends, with you as well, I could not stop myself not to admire the Poland's immediate support to Ukraine, the solidarity, in all directions. And you know my attitude, and I do not need to elaborate more about that. But I just, I should ask again this maybe provocative question as well, but this the farmers' issue, that has been really disturbing, and that has been working quite well with the propaganda, which we have been talking all here. And if you watch some of the TV channels, you get the lengthy stories about the French farmers as well, and but Ukrainian the Polish farmers are the top. So it would be interesting to hear. Of course, overall, on the background and in a bigger picture of Polish assistance and the stance, and Poles are the ones who, along with Lithuanians maybe and the Balts, understand and are at the stake. Poland is probably one of the first who will get the Russian aggression if not deterred. So what does it mean? And I'm sorry to ask this question because you do not deserve that. I know, but I have to.
Thank you very much, Eka, for these questions. I've just prepared not the response, rather the number of other question marks, other questions that are hanging over, that are hanging above so-called West, United West. And so I start with the problem which appeared by our part of Europe. I mean Poland, the eastern part or central part of Europe. The problem of the integration of Ukraine toward with the European Union and NATO, and the postulate the project of the integration Ukraine is in front of us, of so-called West, for more than 20 years. This is not the problem of 2 years of the war. This is dramatic call for for being united, not only in the interests, but also in the same community of values. And these two revolutions in Ukraine in 2004, so-called Orange Revolution and the Revolution of Dignity in 2014, would claim for we've lost years behind us. We as the European Union, as the West, and Poland and the countries of our region have repeatedly made dramatic appeals to accelerate the process of Ukraine's integration with Western structures, not only in the interest of Ukraine. This is not the misericordia or kind of, you know, sympathy. This is our best known, best understood interest, best recognized interest. Today, this lack of decision making, postponing the process and extending it in time takes its toll on all of us. We have to pay for it, but we did not in time make the right decision. In Ukraine and the entire area threatened by Russia, all these hybrid wars and the actions of KGB direct actions of the Putin regime. So delayed decision result in unpreparedness, the lack of coherence in our actions and impatience of societies, because the conflict in Ukraine or war in Ukraine, aggression on Ukraine leads to further problems for the West. One of such visible problems, not only in Poland, these farmers are in Spain, in Germany, in France, the same tractors you can see New Holland, or I don't know the marks of the same tractors are blocking roads. Of course, the border with Ukraine is not blocked by Germans or Spain because it is too far for them to get there. But still, the problem is the same. It's not the Polish problem. This is the result of a lack of decision and the EU's inability to anticipate and address challenges in this context. Just one comment, not directly related to military security or military problems, delivery of munitions, so what, but to social stability. This is the know-how of Putin, how to destroy the Western world. Without ammunition, without hot actions towards us, because it is obvious that the EU still remains an area without an effective defense policy and without the ability to defend the interest in front of Russia. Before Poland's accession, I would remind you one important, before it goes, 20 years of Polish presence in the European Union. We'll celebrate, kind of anniversary of this huge event, but that time, as you remember, Poland was ruled by former communist apparatchiks. I mean, Mr. Miller, Mr. Kwaśniewski, and so on. They were so happy that we'll have subsidies for our agriculture, and they were so proud. We have, taken from Brussels a lot of billions, euros for our agriculture. And many of experts, many politicians claimed that it would be better, to negotiate with Brussels the change of the system of subsidies. So we have now results. So the cheap grain from wheat from Ukraine, it is the result of the lack of a foreseeing or kind of predictions in this bureaucratic system. Sorry, Pavel. In Brussels, so we have to be very true to ourselves and to discuss, you know, without any honey, you know, on our you know, nice mood in this atmosphere of the war. The issue which remained unresolved in the past is taking revenge on us and causing serious tensions in relations with Kiev. Cheap agriculture production from Ukraine and wider the east, because the grain comes also from Russia, maybe more than from Ukraine, in general constitutes one of the serious threats to the stability of the European Union, the stability of the economies of the member states. And who benefits? See, of course, Russia. So let me leave you with such marking question marks. As you know, Polish ambassador always likes to rise dust up and so say something controversial. Thank you very much.
And I added up to that by asking provocative questions, but thank you. Thank you. It was interesting to hear from you that. And finally, Ambassador of Czech Republic, Ambassador Gubernat, thank you for your patience, but you know, you can sum up and finish this great gathering with a panel with your position. I know that you have personal linkages with Ukraine. You have studied there, you've been volunteering when the first refugees came. So I'm sure you have a lot to share in that direction, but also Ambassador Herczynski has just mentioned that there will be this million ammunition pledge given to Ukraine by the end of this year. And I know that your Prime Minister has raised that issue that, you know, if Europe does not have enough, then let's look outside. And then also your President has talked about the same, actually finding the source outside the EU at the Munich conference. So if you can comment on that, how possible is it to reach the consensus on that? Thank you.
Thank you, Eka. Thank you. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it's always quite difficult to speak as the last because I don't have such a, let's say, ability to sum up everything, but I will try at least to avoid to repeat what was already mentioned by my colleagues. You know, and thank you very much for organizing this event. It's for me the first time because I am here in Georgia since August of last year. So I thank you very much, the organizer, for giving me this opportunity to share with you some of my views, remarks, and also the country's position on the 2 years war in Europe. I would start by mentioning what was already said by my Ukrainian colleague and good friend Alexander, that we know all that Vladimir Putin launched a war against Ukraine 2 years ago, but we have really to bear in mind very clearly that the Russian aggression has been going on for 10 years, since the year 2014, when its army seized Crimea and sparked armed conflict in Eastern Europe. And I think now, it's my personal view, that it was some kind of test of Putin to us, and I'm sorry to say that unfortunately we didn't pass well. We should be clear that this war is not somewhere far away. It is in Europe and not far from our borders, in fact not far from our doors. And Putin is waging war not just against Ukraine, but against the entire West. And when I'm speaking about the West, so I don't have in mind purely the geographical meaning of the world, but rather the whole part of the world sharing the same democratic values and principles. From the Russian point of view, the West is main enemy. And if Russia succeeds in Ukraine, the Russian military machine will not stop, but will only become stronger. So we have to be aware of this fact. And then the cost to the West would be incomparably higher than our current support to the Ukraine. And in our view, the assistance to Ukraine is in fact some kind of investment for our future security. Moscow goals is very clear, so to defeat and break Ukraine and make it its colony, to weaken NATO and the EU as much as possible, and to disrupt the West and the whole security architecture throughout Europe. We are convinced that the Ukraine has the right to defend itself and seek to restore its territorial integrity, and we fully support it. In this, our Ukrainian friends, including by supplying military material, but I have to say that step by step we are moving from this simple assistance, if may I say so, and supply to very intensive defense industrial cooperation. We are also providing humanitarian aid and contributing to the training of Ukrainian soldiers, because we know that Ukraine needs now as much as possible the good and well-prepared soldiers. And last but not least, we are also financial share on aid coordinated by NATO. It's virtually certain that without Western military and financial assistance, Ukraine can no longer bravely resist Russian aggression. And this would have far-reaching consequences for security on the European continent as well on the global scene. In fact, we think that the credibility of democratic countries is at stake, and we are indicating whether and how we are committed to defending our value against aggressive forces in the world. And the defeat of Ukraine would fundamentally change global geopolitical architecture. And I think that we should put ourselves very simple question, whether it's possible to imagine a peaceful coexistence and cohabitation of Russian and European system of value. And our answer will be very short and very clear: no. In fact, Russia has no interest in any peace talks, and the only credible peace plan has been prepared by the President Zelensky, and we as the Czechs, we are supporting its implementation, and in fact also actively participating in the work of the working group on nuclear and radiation safety. We see the plan as the only path to just and sustainable peace, and I would like to emphasize or underline that no peace solution can be found without Ukraine's support and participation. I would like to assure you here that Czechia will support Ukraine for as long as necessary, and the level of Czech assistance to Ukraine, whether it's military, political, diplomatic, humanitarian, financial, will not be reduced. You know, hand in hand with government aid goes also massive support from the Czech NGOs, region and municipalities, companies, and also individuals in a wide range of activities. As it was mentioned by some of my colleagues, we also very much support Ukraine's accession to the EU and NATO, as it will increase in our view the security and the prosperity of the whole Europe. And this is in our view, Ukraine-EU membership is seen as the strongest security guarantee that we as EU can offer. So we stress the urgency of proceeding with the screening process and submitting the negotiation frameworks to guide Ukraine's EU accession talks. Because we are convinced that Ukraine needs a clear political signal of further support from the Western world, and Ukrainians need to feel that they are counted on in the West. I think that if we provide to Ukraine what they really needs as soon as possible, then Ukraine will prevail. You know, and oppositely, if Russia will will succeed in Ukraine, our security would be directly threatened, and the cost which will be necessary to ensure our security would increase many times over. You know, we have seen throughout history that appeasement doesn't work. It didn't work under Hitler, and it will not work under Putin. We Czechs, we can tell the story. In my country, we remember very well what the Russian imperialism is capable of. For example, the bullets from Russian tanks can still be seen on the National Museum in Prague. We support also the investigation of war crimes committed in Ukraine and the punishment of the perpetrators. We call for the establishment of a special international tribunal to deal with the crime of aggression committed by the top officials of the Russian Federation in Ukraine. Since the beginning of the Russian aggression, my country has supported the strongest possible sanction measures, and maybe you know that we are really strong advocates of this sanction really from the beginning. We know that sometimes this sanction needs the time. We really appreciated the courage and energy and the relentless activity of the Ukrainian strong civil society, and we consider the civil society to be the key to the transformation of the whole country and a very important partner. And in particular, we are providing long-term financial support also to Ukrainian human rights organizations and independent media. I think that we need to get somehow of the habitual mindset that every conflict must be resolved primarily through negotiations and confront Russia politically firmly and firmly. Because a caution approach is not good for everyone. It prolongs the killing in Ukrainians, but also the Russian soldiers and civilians. And as you may know, Russians interpret a cautious approach as our weakness, and it motivates it to be even more aggressive. You know, Putin may think that the time is on his side. He relies on our fatigue. And so we must prove he's wrong once again. And we must not relent in helping Ukraine. To be tired of the war in Ukraine is to be tired of our own security, and we must not give up. Yes, you have mentioned, Eka, that our initiative of our Prime Minister and then also the President, Petr Pavel, let's say, to start to seek to try to find the ammunition outside of the Union. I think that there is not yet still, let's say, the agreement, a complete agreement on this, but already the first step were made, and I have the information that it would be possible to, let's say, to get some first delivery even in the light of the months, not months, or even the year how it was mentioned or how it was stated before. So this is I am very, very glad for such an initiative from the Prime Minister of Czechia and the President. And yes, you have mentioned the Ukraine is very, very close to my heart because I spent there 5 wonderful students years, so I have a lot of friends there, not only in Kiev but also in Ukraine, in the whole country. In fact, the Kiev is like my second hometown. We set up the WhatsApp group immediately after the aggression with my classmate, and we have the regular chat. So sometimes I have even, I can say, I have even more or a lot of information first hand, so to speak. Of course, I'm thinking about them and trying to be in contact because I know how difficult it is. And you know, the second very, very, let's say, very emotional for me experience was after the beginning of the war. We immediately started, like the other countries, also to accept war refugees. In our case, in the case of Czechia, it was 500,000. So I think that as regards when you compare the size of the country and the number of the refugees, so it's quite a high number. It's true that some of them were then continuing to other countries. Some of them during these 2 years came back to Ukraine. But I think the majority stay in my country. We help them to job. They learn language, and they are step by step trying to be integrated in the Czech society. And you know, at the time, at the beginning, there was really the shortage of Ukrainian-speaking people in the reception center on our side, and so our authorities decided to use the Czechs with Russian language skill, because I can speak Russian, so I wanted to help, so I applied, and I was going for several days to this refugee center and to interpret or to help to the interpretation. And I can tell you that it was really very emotional and also psychologically challenging to see the families with the small children, the old people, handicapped people, often coming with only the plastic bag, sometimes without documents. And they were so happy that they have managed to escape the war zone and grateful for even little help. So they told us our stories, and it was really so hard and so cruel for them. So I think that we have to do everything possible to stop it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Yes, I just, I also share your view that appeasement does not help. And I, keep repeating this quote from Churchill, if I remember that correctly, that the appeaser is a person who feeds crocodile thinking that will be eaten, to be the last one to be eaten. But there is, rationality, and there is appeasement, and there is, difference between that as well. But yeah, fully sharing your position. Thank you. And now, as I've predicted, we did not fit into an hour and 15 minutes, but I'm pretty sure that everyone enjoyed the panel. But I'll ask organizers to give us maybe, a little bit more, to have a chance to ask the questions for the audience. And please name yourself, and if you have a specific question, please indicate whom the question is addressed. Nino. Maybe three, and then we can.
Tamar Ginzurashvili Media Development Foundation. My question is regarding battle of narratives. Mr. Ambassador Herchinsky mentioned. We are observing emerging speculations on the victory of Ukraine, meaning increased influence of Turkey in our region, meaning that only Russia can deter Turkish ambition in this region to restore its Ottoman Empire. Could you highlight what victory of Ukraine means for free world, including for Georgia, and what is the role of Turkey in this war? Thank you.
Thank you. So the first question was about the consensus on understanding the end of the war. Who wants to take it? It was not addressed. Okay, and defeat in Russia, so.
Thank you very much to Nino for a very provocative question. As we have very little time, I can say that time is so short that it's impossible to go into details. But in fact, you have exposed something that it's still a subject for discussions. And I have to confess, very heated discussions. As we all agree that the war needs to end with Ukrainian victory, and we all understand what Ukrainian victory is, so full recuperation of occupied territories, Russia's responsibilities for crimes committed, and war reparations to Ukraine for all the damages that Russia has done. And this is basically the peace formula of President Zelensky. The issue of what does it mean for Russia, I still, at least among 27 members of the European Union, is an open question. I don't necessarily think, this is me speaking, that Ukrainian victory should automatically mean the defeat of Russia in a sense that we have seen the defeat of Nazi Germany in 1945. So no one wants to hang, whatever flag in Moscow and see Putin dead. But you have just heard my Polish colleague speaking in his national capacity. I have the same nationality, but what I can say is that Ukrainian victory not automatically means a defeat of Russia that we know from 1945 in case of Nazi Germany. And what we want to achieve is full restoration of territorial integrity of Ukraine, borders from 1991, which of course includes Crimea, but at least on part of the European Union, we do not want, at least at this stage, to go any further.
I agree with much of what Pavel has said, but I think it's a good opportunity, and Nino, thank you for presenting it, to reiterate that one person could end this war today, and it's President Putin. He could make the decision today to end this war, and hasn't. So the question is not only what does peace look like for Ukraine, and I agree, Pavel, but what does it look like for Russia? And I would say one element of peace for Ukraine must include that Russia can't regroup, rearm, and do the same thing again in a year, 5 years, 10 years. And also, a key element of peace for Ukraine means that Russia pays for its crimes and pays to help rebuild Ukraine, the parts of it that it has destroyed. The last point I'll make is we all must continue to invest so that when Ukraine wins, Ukrainians have a country that was worth fighting for, that we continue to contribute to rehabilitation, that we mean it when we say we're going to put money behind reconstruction, that we continue to support the reforms that the government's undertaking. And as Pavel so rightly stated, they've been doing that, making progress while they're fighting for their existence. And I think it's incumbent upon all of our countries to continue to support them in that process despite the war.
Would you like any of you to comment? Twice. Yeah.
I think it's okay. Thank you. Sorry, Eka.
No, it's
just
okay.
I agree with what Pavel and Robin said. Just want to insist on one point that President Macron keeps repeating, but that you've been saying already, is that a victory is a peace decided by Ukraine. and in full respect with international law. But the important thing is decided by Ukraine. What we are doing is supporting Ukraine in its right to self-defense, so it's for Ukraine to decide what victory and peace are.
Thank you. And there is a question about narrative, and then Ambassador Fisher. So, narratives, Russia, Turkey, if someone wants to comment on that.
Responsible for. No, let me, because we are short on time, so let me be very brief. Turkey is a NATO ally, and Turkey is a candidate country for membership in the European Union, and we count on Turkey being as close to the like-minded as possible. I understand that the current leadership of Turkey is supporting Ukraine, but who also wants to have working relationship with Russia. It's a very challenging dance to dance, and I sincerely hope that with the time passing, Turkey will get closer and closer to the like-minded position. Thank you.
Thank you for taking this. And Ambassador.
So I had to get the question from the foreign policy expert, right? I believe it was twofold about the perceptions of the German public of what a great risk is, and that Russia is not is number 6 or 7. Well, the German public, you know, they are what they are. They think what they think. I don't know the list, but I imagine climate change is right up there. I think I read from Munich Security Conference, Islamic terror is right up there. I think both are big risks and challenges to the German and public and other publics. The public opinion has something to do with the battle of the narratives. And we have very active Russian-inspired disinformation in Germany. We have parties on the far left and the far right that transport that. So my only response is, if it's in the top 10, that's good enough. And what I've tried to explain is we have a government that says full support for Ukraine as long as it takes, and we just signed a deal for 10 years that makes us kind of a, as I mentioned, a guarantor of Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty for the next 10 years. And we're not alone. We're with all these good countries. Here, the second question was about the arms, right, and the long-range missiles. Just to repeat, there's a discussion about that in the governing coalition. There was just a resolution in Parliament that said to give Ukraine what it needs, including long-range arms. So it left it open. It didn't say Taurus, yes or no. Some people in the government are for, some people are careful. And I would just underline that being careful is not being naive or stupid or unsolidaric or showing a lack of solidarity. The Germans have learned the hard way that military solutions are, how do you say, less than you usually expect. I think the Americans say gung-ho attitude. We'll go in there and hit them with everything we've got, and then the problem will be solved. That's not the case. We don't just have to win the war and the battle, we have to win the peace. And as was mentioned, the solution will not be an unconditional surrender of Russia, a loss of sovereignty for Russia. Our goal is not regime change in Russia. It may happen, we may have personal opinions about it. We would hope for a Russia that's a friendly neighbor, or at least a neighbor that sticks to international law. We would hope for Russia, as for any country, that it has a stable development with a good economy. By and large, that's tied to democracy and a market economy. we would love to have Russia as a partner, but at this time it's not possible because of Russian behavior. And so a blind belief in arms alone Germany has good reasons to be cautious of that. And we just had in Germany, since you follow German events, you probably know, an enquete commission of the German parliament about Afghanistan. 20 years, and we threw everything, the whole toolbox at it, and the enquete commission has decided it was a failure. So our toolkit is limited. We have been slow, we have been cautious. In the end, we have come up with the hardware that Ukraine needs. Perhaps too slow, it's not perfect, but our commitment is there, and it's coupled with our historical experience and caution and, what do you say, our reserve and an unbridled belief in military solutions.
Thank you, and I think that we have exhausted our guests, and we have to, stop here. I just wanted to thank you all. Thank you all for this support that your institution, your nations are providing to Ukraine, and that first of all it is for Ukraine, but that means a lot for other nations as well, including Georgia. And also I did not have a chance to say thank you to all of you for supporting Georgia's path towards the EU. That meant a lot for the Georgian public. It helps us to keep the vector, it empowers us, and gives a hope that, if you fight, you can achieve everything. So thank you, and thank you for being with us today, and of course to the US for the continuous support of Georgia. So thank you all, and please join me with applauding our participants.
Yes. Again, yeah. Okay. Welcome once again. We're continuing our one-day conference on marking the 2 years of the full-scale invasion of Russia and Ukraine. Lot has been said by distinguished ambassadors. Of course, we understand the specifics, the sensitivity of ambassadors speaking. So I have the privilege, of having more freely speaking, excellent speakers here with us today. Of course, first and foremost, Evgeny Agaver, who is the well-known, prominent foreign policy expert. I fully share the questions you have put, and probably I will put in the same direction the questions. She is the non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council in Turkey, and she has the vast experience of both in academia as well as in civil service, also serving as the diplomatic service, the Embassy of Ukraine to Turkey. She recently served 2 years ago or 3 years ago to the advisor to the Prime Minister of Ukraine, and just recently, she also was, she joined the German Garmisch Center of the National Security Studies as the professor. So welcome, welcome, Evgenia, once again. Of course, Poland, always our Polish friends, Polish ambassador, as he promises and he provides with the best speakers and the experts from Poland. But from this status and the position, let me join you in your reflection, you know, about the different flag over the Kremlin, you know, and about the fate of Putin. I will share fully the expression of the Foreign Minister Sikorsky, who said, "Join me not in standing by Ukraine, but sending Putin to hell." And it was kind of a correction, at least to Hague. But okay, let's send him to Hague. But I do prefer to hell. So you have my support definitely. So we have the excellent speaker from the Polish Institute of the International Affairs, Daniel Szczególski, is correctly Szczególski, who is the head of the Eastern Europe program at the PISM, the Polish Institute, well-known and very prominent institute. He is on the board of the various scientific journals and the author of the reports and analysis. He knows Ukrainian, by the way. You can put the question in Ukrainian if you want. And of course, he is very well aware of the Ukraine's, all the process of the Ukraine's integration in the European Union. Welcome to Tbilisi, to Georgia. Last but not least, of course, is Ambassador Georgi Badridze, my good friend and colleague, a senior fellow at the Rondelli Foundation, with the one of the first Georgian diplomats in the Georgian diplomatic service. It doesn't definitely mean he's old. He's Georgia is young, definitely, but he has served in Turkey and as the ambassador to the United Kingdom, and he served his country in various positions. But now we are on the same board and the organization, the Rondelli Foundation, and he is always providing with his thoughts, provocative thoughts and in-depth thoughts about the regional global security. Of course, I will ask Evgenia to start with the situation. And last but not least, definitely we have much more space. We are enjoying, you know, that we have much more space and much more time for Q&A in this session. So my first question, Evgenia, will be, as I said, a lot has been said, but it is different. How is it viewed from Ukrainians? We are discussing here in Europe, in the United States, there are discussions, you know, what does that mean, the victory, what does that mean for Ukrainians, what does that mean for Europe, for the world? And there was then mentioning of the carefulness in regard to the provision of the weapons. I think this carefulness costs lives, and Lithuanian ambassador very rightly mentioned the outline, the President Zelensky's well-known quote that I do not need I do need weapons. How is it today? Is this a goal for Ukraine to hold on in 2024 and win in 2025?
Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you very much for your kind introduction, and also many thanks to the Rondelli Foundation and to the Embassy of Ukraine in Tbilisi for the invitation. It's always great to be here. I had some short interactions with Georgian friends yesterday, and I was really absolutely happy to hear that, I'm sorry, we only speak English, we don't switch to Russian. which of course was very much supported by myself. So I do enjoy it, and every single time I come here, I love being here even more and more, though there are some nuances and sensitivity that we can discuss. And because you wanted us to be very undiplomatic and very frank, I also have to make a disclaimer that I do not represent the Marshall Center. I represent myself here just as an expert, so that I can be really frank on what I'm saying. Well, regarding the situation in Ukraine, I'm not going into details, of course, of what happens on the battlefield. I just want to make a couple of points on how it's seen from Ukraine, including from my native city of Odessa, which was under attack again this night, with unfortunately casualties again among civilians. And that is why I do have a problem when I hear a word stalemate in Ukraine. Because the situation in Ukraine now, it's not a stalemate. And unfortunately, it's not moving in a right direction where we would like it to move. Because I just reread the questions that were on the list that Eka kindly shared with me and her team shared with me a couple of months ago. And back then, even 2 months ago, we were going to discuss if the West would double down its efforts in providing arms and ammo to Ukraine. And now what we are discussing is if there is a decision coming from the US Congress, from the German government on supplies of weapons. And our soldiers sitting in the trenches, they take time when they have, apart from fighting, to scroll their phones and to check whether there is a decision coming from a European capital or coming from the US on finally unblocking the process and supplying of any type of ammo, but of course specifically long-range missiles. So now we're discussing that Ukraine is outmanned and Ukraine is outgunned. Then again, we were talking, and last time I remember being here at the conference, we were talking about how to make sure that the West is not afraid of Russia being defeated. And we still have to some extent, those discussions. But on the other hand, we're now discussing also how the West should be afraid of Ukraine being defeated. Because I think we are comforting ourselves with the successes that Ukraine used to have on the battlefield before. And that's absolutely true. Ukraine has done a great job in deoccupying 50% of the territories which were occupied in February 2022. But on the other hand, this success is not final. Quote Churchill, the success is not final, and it's not irreversible. It is reversible. And exactly for that reason, I think that we don't have time for discussions, and we don't have time just for the words and statements of solidarity that Ukraine appreciates a lot. And this is not that the West is doing too little, too slow. It's just that Russia is doing much more, much fast. And Russia has been using this time in a much more efficient way. So I do want to use this opportunity to thank our Western partners for all support, financial, economic, ammo, weapons, decisions taken, diplomatic support, refugees, Ukrainian refugees in Europe. We appreciate it in Ukraine. But it's just that when we're discussing 2% of GDP for NATO, on the other hand, we see how Russia is taking decision to allocate 1/3 of its budget for the next year for military and defense production. So this is something to keep in mind. And then again, Russia has used this time to consolidate its axis of allies and partners, including Iran, including China, including North Korea. And that is why when we're talking about Ukraine and the possibility of Ukraine failing, which is still there, by the way, so I'm not really that optimistic about how Ukrainians are doing great now, because it's really tough. It's just as tough as it can be. So the price for a failure, potential failure in Ukraine is not only about Ukraine and not even about Russia. It's about also Iran, which is quite active now. And it's not only about Iranian drones, but it's also about joint production, Russian-Iranian production in Tatarstan in Kazan, and then this new treaty which was signed between Moscow and Tehran on defense cooperation, including modernization of all military infrastructure in the region. And it's also about China's presence here. So I do think this is important to understand. So another point, one of the concerning, most concerning things for me is the thing that I mentioned during my question, that is a change of threat perception. And it's not obviously only about Germany. It's really difficult to keep focus on one single war in Ukraine, even if this is a major war in Europe. Because we also have Gaza-Israel, because we also have so many different threats. So when we go through the list of those threats that European societies and the US society, by the way, put as the top priorities for themselves, you would see migration, cyber threats, polarization of society, economic problems, inflation, terrorism. But then these are all, in a way, the consequences, whereas Russia and Russian aggression in Ukraine is a root cause, because migration, inflation, cyber attacks, this is everything which has been instrumentalized and weaponized by Russia, and this is exactly what Russia wants, to create multiple crises in different parts of the world, to have a long war of attrition in Ukraine, to have the West being overstretched, to cause maximum pressure on the Western capitals, to inflict maximum damage on Ukraine, and then just to get away with what it has, saying that we don't want escalation, so that's why probably we have to freeze the conflict now. And that is the end goal of Russia. So my question is whether this war can be won. Definitely yes, for Ukraine and for the West, absolutely. There is no defeatism in Ukraine. People are still resilient, people are still willing to fight back because there is no other option for Ukraine. But on the other hand, can this war be won if nothing changes in weapon supplies, in arms supplies and support to Ukraine? No, it can't. Can Ukrainians only win this war with their morale and motivation, which was so kindly mentioned by ambassadors here on the first panel? And I do share this because I spent 2 years of this war in Ukraine. Absolutely, we're ready to fight back. But can Ukrainians fight back with their own bodies? And can they fight back with their kindergartens and schools and, I don't know, hospitals being a shield and not having arms? I would say no. And my last point, also probably a question, is will Russia be satisfied with the territorial gains in Ukraine? And I would say no. Will Russia proceed with its territorial gains and attacks, hybrid but also kinetic, on other countries, if should the situation allow and should the conditions permit it? Definitely yes. And this is exactly what we're seeing now. On the 29th of February, we are expecting a so-called referendum or whatever decision request from the so-called government of the so-called Transnistria, whatever they call themselves, self-proclaimed republic, to be annexed by Russia. Georgia, it's a perfect place to discuss Russian creeping occupation and also Russian infiltration. Look at what's going on with spies and agents and all these networks of covert influence in different countries in Europe, but also in our region. So it's not only about Ukraine for sure, but probably main takeaways from my remarks here would be that first, we cannot allow Ukraine to fail, because that would also mean failure to Georgia, to Moldova, and to the United West. The second takeaway I'd like you probably to remember from this panel, from my remarks, is that we don't have time. It's not only about support, it's also about urgency. For Ukraine, this is just as urgent as it could be, because it can only get worse for Ukraine. And that is why, third conclusion that I would draw here, there are no easy decisions at this point, absolutely not. But the worst decision would be just not to make any critical, dramatic decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Evgenia. Of course, with all conclusions, I fully agree with you that without speedy and united unanimous decisions and support to Ukraine in the particular needs, practical needs, will be really very hard, not only for Ukraine, but for its immediate neighbors and for the entire Europe and globally. So what should Europe do? Poland is, and I'm sure will be in the lead of providing support to Ukraine. The good news I saw on Twitter is that Prime Minister Tusk has ordered to add some more crossing points for the military stuff to be passed through the border to increase the traffic of the military equipment provided to Ukraine. But what else needs to be done to shift and make it unanimous, the position of the democratic world from not to lose for Ukraine, but to defeat Russia and Putin? What is Polish perspective on that?
That's going to be my own personal perspective, Ambassador. But let me start with a big warm thanks for Georgian and Ukrainian friends for having me here. I must say that's my first time in Georgia at all. So let me first enjoy the panel and then enjoy the city later on in the evening. But if there is one single thing that Ukraine really needs to win this war, it is a mental change among the Western policymakers, and mental Zeitenwende, if you like, to make sure that Russia must really be defeated and that Russia may be defeated. I mean, if you think that Russia cannot be defeated, please remember that there is a National Unity Day in Moscow to celebrate the end to the Polish control of the Kremlin. Russia may be defeated. I mean, we did it a couple of times in the history, and Russia shall be defeated. And Crimea is the key point here. Everything started with Crimea, and everything would be hopefully done with Crimea as well, because this is something, I mean, only losing control over Crimea would convince Russians at some point that the war does not pay off, at least no more. Yes, I'm a bit hopeful, but let's say there is an old Polish movie, a cheap one, budgetary one, and not really fancy. It's a comedy, but there is a nice sentence there. So the gentleman is having, say, sort of a lecture. No one is really listening to him, but he says, if there is a thing that cannot really be done, you need someone who doesn't know about it, who will come and do it. And this is something that we need with Ukraine and with the Western community. We need to really change the perception, and I fully agree with Evgenia. We need to change this perception of the Western policymakers. And if you listen to the conversation of the ambassadors, I'm quite sure we are still not there yet. There are some steps that needs to be taken. Now, what needs to be done? I mean, I think there are three front lines. I would say this mental Zeitenwende would be, breakthrough. I don't know, game changer. Oh, let's call it game changer. And now you can have three breakthroughs. We can move Ukraine along three front lines. The first one is the easiest one. I mean, the obvious one, which is the military support. We need to scale up the military support to Ukraine, but first of all, we need to provide Ukraine with modern weapons that would allow Ukraine to strike strategic targets and economic sites in Russia, so on the Russian territory. This is something that hurts, and being careful doesn't really help in this respect. Yes. The second issue is security guarantees for Ukraine. My personal opinion is, and I've been saying it all along, this war would not end unless Ukraine is brought into NATO. So we have kicked the can down the road, hopefully indefinitely, that the problem would solve, or let's say the problem would vanish, would disappear somehow, but it won't. So the Russians are playing a long game, and we have to be prepared to play a long game as well. Security guarantees for now, and bringing Ukraine to NATO tomorrow. Let's put it this way. I'm quite sure, I mean, I'm fully aware that there's still no consensus within NATO. in terms of NATO accession, but hopefully tomorrow it will change. And we have been running through this sort of vicious cycle. So there are people in the West saying we cannot really provide Ukraine with security guarantees because the war is still ongoing. But basically the war is still ongoing because we have not provided Ukraine with any security guarantees. So either we make, again, an important, maybe even unpopular, tough decision and we break this cycle. And we are the first ones to provide the security guarantees to Ukraine. Otherwise, we are still playing the Russian game. They are always the first ones. We have always reacted to the Russians. We haven't been really. I mean, we should have turned the table long ago. We are fully capable of that, especially in terms of our economic power. This brings me to the economic support for Ukraine. That's the third front line that we can move Ukraine along. So seize the Russian assets, rearm and rebuild Ukraine. And this is something that will put Ukraine firmly on this long-term path. Russians are there for a long game. This is something that Russians are trying to do now to prevent it from materializing. They still think that they can wait us out. The time is on their side. And basically, I'm sorry for saying that, if I was President Putin, I would come to the same conclusion. I'm looking at the discussions in the United States, I'm looking at the different discussions in Europe, I would make the same assumption. Just wait. Maybe President Trump would come and then everything would change like that. Yes. Then what you mentioned Poland. Of course, Poland has an important role to play. I think Poland could really be a player to mobilize the others in Europe in this respect, showing we can defeat Russians. We should defeat Russians. And fostering the discussion, what would Ukrainian victory really mean? So defending Ukraine is a very nice thing, but it's not enough. Yes, defeating Russians is worthy a case. And okay, that this could be the first time that I would agree with German ambassador. It doesn't have to be the collapse of the Russian regime. I know. The point is that there must be a collapse of the Russian troops in Ukraine. This is what we are fighting for. At the end of the day, it doesn't have to end with the change of the regime. Though I agree with the ambassador, I wouldn't mind. Definitely not. And I'm quite comfortable with Russia not sticking to the international law. I mean, unless Russia sticks to its borders. Let's do whatever they want inside Russia, not outside Russia. Yes, and of course, what Poland could do is to mobilize the others again to bring Ukraine closer to the European Union and to NATO, to foster these discussions with the candidate status for Ukraine, with the NATO summit in Washington upcoming. There is a role to be played by Poland, especially given the close ties between Poland and the United States. You are fully aware of these discussions in the United States, in Washington, who spends how much on defense. So this puts, let's say, this gives Poland solid position in these discussions within the European Union and within NATO. And I'm gonna end up here with just one sentence. I mean, about perception. So I see Putin as a dog in the manger. You know, he says Ukraine will be mine. I will subjugate it. Otherwise, I will destroy it. So it's not a territorial conquest. You cannot compromise with territory if it's not a territorial conquest. This is to deny Ukraine its right for sovereign existence. That's what Ukraine is fighting for.
Daniel, you definitely deserve the next invitation to Georgia and to the Rondelli conferences. Georgi, the hard questions to you. What are the major global challenges to the mental Zeitenwende, as Daniel has mentioned, in the international understanding of Ukraine's victory? And how is it perceived in the world? The understanding of importance of Ukraine's victory. And the second, of course, is the issue of from the Georgian perspective. What does it mean for us, Ukraine's victory? I have also, I can share my personal emotions. I visited Ukraine in 1 month, little bit more than 1 month after the full-scale invasion, and I saw Georgian volunteers, I saw Ukrainian militaries, and they were all saying that Georgian guys, that they are not only fighting for Georgia, for Ukraine, but also for Georgia's security and future stability. So, please, Georg.
Thank you. During our previous panel, which was endowed excellently with ambassadors, I personally witnessed that Zeitenwende. 2 ambassadors from the 2 pillar countries of the European Union. It is an alliance of equals, but let's face it, European Union is built around the partnership of Germany and France. And both ambassadors said something that exactly points out that Zeitenwende, the German ambassador, said, and something that not many of his colleagues would agree a few years ago, that the existence of gray zones around Russia was the invitation to its crimes against not just neighbors, but its attempt to destroy a rules-based international system, something that we've been warning, crying out for years, but we weren't heard. And the French ambassador said, and again, I would like to reiterate and also elaborate on this, that the price, the cost of supporting Ukrainian victory is nothing compared to the cost of the Russian victory. And can I say, just as someone who, I will put aside false modesty, have been calling upon our partners since at least 2008, I'm on the record saying that our partners have been ignoring the new Cold War, which already had begun, and some of the main decision makers have been just trying to avert it by unilateral action, which translates into appeasement. 2 months before the war, I had to respond to a very senior American diplomat on the same pages where he published his catastrophic, in my view, letter in which he was basically justifying Putin's claims over Ukraine. And my letter was called, "The appeasement had been tried, it didn't work. It doesn't work." And just months before the war, I'm on record saying that the expectation that this war would last only for a few days or weeks was false, that this was going to be the bloodiest and longest war since World War II. Right? Now, back to what is at stake now. It's not just the direct threat to Europe. The implications, the outline of the implications are already global. We have seen the early shoots of all sorts of evil groups, evil powers, evil organizations that have started copying Russia or sometimes playing into Russia's hands. For instance, can anyone explain what was the strategic goal of Hamas attack on Israel? What would Hamas achieve? Just think, if you think about this independently of Russia's war on Ukraine. Can anyone explain any rationale there? And yes, I know these attacks have been happening in the past, but this particular one happened at the back of repeated Hamas visits to Moscow, including open, public meetings with the Russian leadership. Can anyone say for sure that Venezuela's challenge to the territorial integrity of its neighbor, its declared ambition to annex a territory of its neighbor, has nothing to do with what has Russia done in Ukraine and what it's doing? Iran, North Korea, all sorts of destructive forces, have they been as active as they are now? And what would be the message, incentive? For instance, let's look at China, enormously important player in the world. Our American friends have been obsessed with China. They have declared China as #1 threat as opposed to that of Russia. Would Russian victory in Ukraine, or Russia not defeated in Ukraine, would it deter China from considering a real military action against Taiwan, or would the Russian defeat deter it? What I'm saying is that the threat of not defeating Russia is global. The forces that have stake in destroying the rules-based system have shown their preparedness to unite and cooperate. The only thing that can prevent total collapse of the international order is to make sure that blatant aggression simply does not pay off anymore. And it has so far, unfortunately. And Georgia has been the first victim of Russia's determination to break it. And if we then were speaking mainly about the European system of security that was at stake, today we're talking about the global system based on any kind of normalcy, any kind of rules. I'm not convinced that China would be interested to be part of this coalition that breaks the system, because until now at least, the Chinese view was to use the system for its own interest. But if Russia succeeds, then everything can happen. Then this would open the room, the door, for China to consider rearranging the whole system based on Chinese domination. But it all originates in Russia's action. And it should start and it should end with Russia being defeated. Because as I said, the alternative is a global catastrophic destruction of the system upon stability, well-being of all nations depend.
We still have time for questions. Thank you, dear speakers, for your opening remarks, for your thoughts shared with us. Today it was not mentioned at the first panel, and I hope very much that maybe I'm naive, but there will be less mentioning of Minsk III negotiations with Putin, negotiations with Russia, and forcing Ukraine to sit down and negotiate with the dictator, with the terrorist #1 in the world. So, but as I listened to the experts from the Munich Security Conference, it was not in the official meetings, but it was in the air. Still, it was in the air. Evgenia, how do you think, where it comes from, this permanent talks about the possible discussions, negotiations? I know that everything finally would be ended, should be ended with the negotiations, but after the capitulation of Russian Federation, definitely. But where it comes from the European capitals, from across the ocean, from Moscow, where?
Thank you. First of all, I think there are two different types of negotiations. One is a desire to have negotiations for the sake of negotiations and buying time. And another one is a desire to have meaningful negotiations. So for Ukraine, because that's very often what I hear, that Ukraine does not want negotiations, well, Ukraine does not want negotiations, that would just freeze the current situation. But ideally, as you mentioned, negotiations can be also there after the defeat of Russia. Is it time now for negotiations? Definitely not. Where does it come from? First of all, from Moscow, for a variety of reasons. Once, because now this is exactly the time when, for the Kremlin, the ideal scenario would be, on the one hand, to push for negotiations that would just make Ukrainian issue fade away from the international agenda, that would allow Russia to regroup, to attack again. So basically any scenario other than a full victory of Ukraine and restoration of the territorial integrity would be empire strikes back. So you just need to wait until it happens next time. And because there is also the current situation in Ukraine, when Ukraine does not have enough resources to have another successful counteroffensive, this is a perfect time to include all type of Russian, again, hybrid influences, information campaigns, operations of influence, saying that, hey, this war in Ukraine is not winnable. So either you would have these long years of a whatever protracted conflict in Europe, or you can just have peace. So who doesn't want peace? If you ask someone, do you want peace or do you want war? Of course, everyone wants peace. The question is that, do you want a just and sustainable peace, or do you want a ceasefire which would free the current situation and embolden Russia, and not only Russia, as Ambassador mentioned, to attack neighboring countries? So this is one part of the story. Of course, this is a Russian narrative which is pushed in different versions in different capitals, and Russians are really great in producing this tailor-made content, knowing specifically vulnerabilities and sensitivities of different countries. Where does it also come from? I think this comes from the lack of vision of what the victory for Ukraine would look like, and this is exactly what was addressed during the first panel. There is no clear vision, let alone strategy to achieve that, but I would also say a vision of what would the post-Putin Russia or just post-Ukrainian victory Russia look like. Someone would say we want a change of regime in Russia. Someone says we don't want. Should Russia be defeated? Should Ukraine ideally return Crimea? But maybe just that's not doable. So let's stick to the borders of, I don't know, 23rd of February 2022. Even though that's not pronounced, but maybe as a B plan. That's tough. That's tough because that needs vision, that needs commitment, long-term commitment, and that needs a political will to take decisions, which are tough decisions, including for domestic politics. And this is the year of elections. More than 70 elections worldwide, starting from the US, European Union, and all different countries, all different parts of the world. So of course, this is the most vulnerable time for many political elites and governments back home for domestic politics, because all this polarization, all these protests of taxpayers or farmers or someone else, I don't say it's all only Russian blame, but I would definitely say that Russia fuels it, Russia contributes to it, and Russia benefits from it. So when you look at the whole complexity of the situation now, I don't think it's because Ukrainian partners don't want to see Ukraine prosperous, united, and at peace, but it just demands too many efforts. And unfortunately, I still don't see that cognitive or mental Zeitenwende to make that happen. And the last point here, probably from the Ukrainian perspective, we've seen this formula changing quite often. We will stand by Ukraine as long as it takes. And then I think from Latvian Minister of Foreign Affairs, there was another formula coming, give Ukraine or stand by Ukraine until its victory, and do whatever it takes for Ukrainian victory, and not as long as it takes. And I'm afraid that now in Ukraine, we may have another formula, which is just to be with Ukraine as long as Ukraine has Ukrainians to fight. Because as long as it takes, when you look at the demographic situation in Ukraine, it's challenging. When you compare Ukraine to Russia, it's really challenging. Ukrainians tend to to finish. I'm sorry to say that. So it doesn't mean that we cannot win this war, that we cannot fight, but it just means again that we don't have time. And if we want to have negotiations for a peace which would be acceptable for Ukraine and for the Western partners, then we need to hurry up, because unfortunately Russians are using their soldiers as a cannon fodder, and they can allow it both in terms of their mentality, that's how they see their citizens, and in terms of their population. And in Ukraine we don't have that luxury. Luckily, because we have very different mentality, and unfortunately because we just have a few people.
Mr. Sheligovsky, would you like to add on that, what just Ms. Gaber has said?
Absolutely. Ambassador, you asked where does it come from that this change didn't happen. So I'm going to tell you from where from. I had a discussion a couple of months ago with a top-level diplomat from one of these two big countries, but I'm not going to say which one, in Warsaw. And I remember the gentleman telling me, you know, Daniel, we had the frozen conflict in Ukraine for 8 years, and we can manage that financially, politically, and in terms of security. But you, Poles, you would like to see these internal changes in Russia. We cannot control them. It's not manageable. We don't like it. So if you ask me where does it come from, it comes from the fact that there is still this overwhelming, paralyzing fear of defeating Russia. And at the end of the day, it means that for many of them, it is much safer to let Ukraine suffer than to defeat the Russians, because they are so afraid of consequences. And if you look at Jake Sullivan and this management escalation, I mean, that's the sole purpose of his approach. So unfortunately, I don't really see this change coming, and now maybe I may come up with rather a question, not necessarily an answer. What gives you what gives you a better added value? The coalition of the willing, moving farther and farther in a small, in a smaller circle, or still trying to keep the lowest common denominator among everyone? Who delivers more at the end of the day? I remember that. I mean, I understand the sole purpose of keeping this widespread coalition at the very beginning, but now we face difficult decisions, and Ukraine faces difficult decisions as well. And there is a need to reconsider maybe at least partially the approach towards the allies.
And then we open the floor for the questions, please.
I would not point fingers to individuals, but I think our partners in Western capitals need to just re-examine the role of those experts and decision makers or advisors who've been behind the Russia First policy for decades. And this fear of defeating Russia is not new at all. I'm old enough to remember how the United States was panicked at the prospect of the dissolution of the Soviet Union. We were told in Kiev, actually, directly to be quiet, right? Which is, by the way, against American values of freedom, democracy, self-determination. But at the time, like many times after that, the political leaders had convinced themselves, or rather led themselves into this illusion that there is this new democratic Russia, which would be a better partner than any individual nations, even those nations which had been physically, brutally occupied by whether Bolshevik Russia or the Soviet Union, right? And this was prioritized. And by the way, the letter to which I responded actually was addressed to one of the thought leaders of that time, the last American ambassador to the Soviet Union, who's been outrageously justifying Putin's claims over Ukraine, repeating all the propaganda points. And then we witnessed in the 2000s this reset idea. I mean, very noble one, very well-intended one, but a catastrophic policy, not just to Georgia or Ukraine, but to the bilateral relations. Never Russian-American relations been so bad since the launch of the reset. So maybe our partners should just re-examine the role of those people who've been advocating such policies which have failed spectacularly. Okay? And listen, and they always had an alternative school of thought which were ignored. I remember how people, and by the way, it wasn't just us in 2008, predicting the Russian attack on Ukraine and further aggression if its aggression against Georgia was left unchecked. There were very senior, serious Western authorities, I can name. For instance, a good friend of ours at Lucas even published a book in the early 2008, The New Cold War. He was laughed at, or called a fearmonger, a warmonger, this and that. Radek Sikorsky, around that time, was dismissed as a candidate for the job of the EU external relations. Guess why? Because he knew Russia too well, and he may have had some personal feelings toward Russia. And instead they chose, with all due respect, a person with very little expertise on Russia. I'm sorry, like Alex said, we are no more in active diplomatic service. We can say whatever we like. So I'm telling you directly that time and time again, our Western friends chose the opinion of people with questionable expertise over the people who knew Russia and who called its future actions directly and who have been vindicated.
Thank you. Thank you, Georgi, for your very open and frank remarks. Now I open the floor for the questions. I see on this side, of course, here the friends and two questions we're having here. Then we will follow. Please introduce yourself, sir. We already have 3 questions. We can answer them and then continue, please.
Great question on counting what the victory of Ukraine, the failure of Ukraine, or the continuing war would cost. For me, it's very clear. First of all, if we have Ukraine outside of NATO, European Union, and with no major defeat of Russia, that will be not only a gray zone, that will be a black hole. Because it will all the time demand more weapons, more ammunition, more investments, including in recovery and reconstruction, because we don't have proper air defense systems. And the West would have to do that somehow, because an alternative to that would be to have Russia on NATO borders or on the EU borders. So that is something that Western capitals also don't want to see. That's why that would be a constant black hole for money, resources, military defense stuff coming from the West to Ukraine, but then not leading to any major breakthrough on the ground, because if it comes like drip, 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 then it's a never-ending story. An alternative to that would be to help Ukraine win this war and then have Ukraine as a NATO member and just protect NATO countries, European countries from Russia, which would obviously be much, much cheaper. Second thing, when we count what it costs to support Ukraine and all the allocations and the funds from the EU, NATO, and bilateral commitments from different countries to Ukraine, Ukraine appreciates this support for sure. But let's not forget that most of it remains in the same countries. These are investments in the defense production, defense industries of the respective European countries. Very often we talk about taxpayers' money going to Ukraine, but actually they do not go to Ukraine directly. They go to boost economy for more defense production, which is something that not very often we can hear about. So it's a tricky question, but then why there is no this realization, this brings us to the first question, why there is no political will or enough of resolve to help Ukraine decisively win this war. Sometimes this is just miscalculation, because threat perception changes as you go further and further away from border with Russia. Ukraine, Georgia, one layer, then you have Nordic, Baltic, Central and Eastern Europe, including our friends from Poland, from the Baltics, from Sweden, from Norway, and you see a very different picture. I don't hear too much about negotiations somewhere in Poland or in Estonia or Latvia or somewhere. And then the further away you go from the front line, then you have all these discussions about maybe we can still have some negotiations with Russia, or at least we can consider that option. And then one of the major concerns that I have is this constant talk about Putin's Russia, Putin's war. It's not Putin's war, and it's not Putin's Russia. There is no other Russia than the Putin's Russia. First, because Putin is still there, and we see what happens to opposition leaders. I am not going into details on what was the stance of Navalny in Ukrainian case. I'm just going that there is no way opposition can win any elections or anything there. And also addressing the second question, I don't even think this is up to Ukraine to destabilize Russia or to solve the Russia problem. Because Ukraine has to win war in Ukraine, and then at the same time there are expectations that Ukraine should also do something to help Russia win its own war inside Russia. I think it's up to Russians to take care of their future and to decide in which country they want to live. And I also hear this, and I talk to many opposition leaders from time to time in different formats in different conferences, including those, of course, who are in exile now. And they also have this, well, Ukraine should help us do something. No. Because as long as Ukraine or the West helps Russia fix its problems, we will have the Russia that we're having now. If we want to have a different Russia, then it's up to Russians to have their own Zeitenwende, finally, mentally, and to say, hey, this is not going to work. So Ukrainians can do nothing, those who live in Russia, and I don't even think that Ukrainians living in Russia should destabilize Russia, because I don't think the West should do that, because destabilizing the countries from within is Russian tactics. It's not the Western tactics. So what I care about is to have Ukraine winning this war, and to have Ukraine being part of NATO and defending itself. And then whatever happens in Russia, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what happens. Maybe destabilization in Russia happens, maybe it doesn't happen, maybe Putin stayed there, maybe he doesn't. It's just not up to Ukraine to decide, and we cannot control the processes inside Russia. We just have to admit and recognize once this fact that as long as we are afraid of the consequences of this war for Russia, we're not moving anywhere, because we're just having this protracted conflict in protracted war in Ukraine. Once we decide, and by saying we, I mean global West, let's say, or political West, that this war has to be won no matter what, it's the next stage to manage possible scenarios in Russia, because we really don't know what happens. We know what happens if Putin is there, if Russia is there, and if there is war in Ukraine. If Ukraine wins this war, probably nothing happens, because generally Russia just withdraws when it sees a proper symmetric response. It doesn't escalate, it doesn't bring more forces. That's when there are vulnerabilities and this indecisiveness on our part. So honestly, it's up to Russians to decide what happens to their country, and we, sitting here, being represented here on the first panel, countries of NATO, European Union, and the region, we have to take care of our borders, our security, our defense industries, our military production, and our economic recovery and prosperity.
No, I followed the Munich Security Conference as well, and my impression was that if the words could kill, we would have been, long ago away with the Russian troops in Ukraine, but they don't. So the ammunition matters, not the words. I think the ammunition is not there because the big players behind the table don't really believe that Ukraine could win this war. And I think since the very beginning, especially in Washington, the people think that the point is to help Ukraine as long as it takes, but this "it" means till the moment that there are favorable conditions for Ukraine to negotiate with the Russians. Why? Because they still think that Minsk III is viable. They still think that it is, to a large extent, a territorial conquest, which means you can compromise with the territorial concessions, and they still think that no matter how brutal, how cruel, how sad it is, it's just an unfortunate incident on a longer path of cooperation with the Russians. It happened, okay, it's bad, but so what? I mean, the people in Washington think so. So if there is no change in this mental perception, we won't be there. sorry. But I'm gonna take up on the question on the Russian elite, etc. I don't think that there could be any split within the Russian elite, or there could be any change in Russia driven from inside. I mean, it would be desirable, okay, but I don't really believe it. So there are two factors that I see that could play it's a smaller role, step by step, yeah, and do the job. So the first one is strike the targets inside Russia. This is something that matters. So in terms of logistics, strategic targets, economic sites in Russia, not on the occupied territories, in Russia. Deliver the blow there. Deliver decisive blow to the Russian units in Ukraine, so the Russians see that the war doesn't pay off. If I was a Russian, I see the situation the following. We took the Crimea, we took a part of Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast, we took a part of Zaporizhia and Kherson Oblast. So we are still moving forward. So why shall I say we are losing the war? We are not. I mean, if I was a Russian, I would think about the situation this way. We are still moving forward, so why we should change anything? There is no point in doing it. And now we have the whole new social contract in Russia revolving around the war. People are getting social payments, relatively high ones. So the level of the the material condition of the Russian families is going up, especially in the remote regions, so far away from the capital, and the special services and the whole state law enforcement apparatus is getting even more and more rights, call it whatever you want, but basically they are earning a lot of money, they're getting new competences, so they are living quite well off the war. Unless this happens, unless not only the elite but also the ordinary Russians feel the consequences of this war. What is smart sanctions? I love the term smart sanctions. Smart sanctions is hit the elite but leave the population alone. But the population, which is somewhere there passive, they are co-responsible for this war. If there was no huge popular I don't know, euphoria around the Crimean annexation, I dare to say there would have been no invasion in 22nd, and Putin saw it with his eyes that it paid off. So this is why he moved forward. So my 2 cents is hit the Russians, the ordinary Russians, not only the elite, and without a decisive blow along the front line, there would be no negotiations and no deal. No way.
Yeah, first I agree about the connection between the war and the regime stability. But unfortunately, historically, it's been working the other way around. Russia has never had rulers that were good at governing. This is why a country which must be one of the most prosperous country in the world has never been prosperous. At the peak of its prosperity, in 1970s, in whole Russian history, if you compare the economic kind of features of the Soviet Union and other developed countries, it was laughable. Just one example. The cheapest Soviet automobile in 1970s, no offense to my Ukrainian friends, because Zaporozhets is coming. Zaporozhets, which was a notoriously bad car, it was more expensive than Ford Mustang Boss 300, right? Top performing American car. It was more expensive both in absolute terms and also in terms of wages per month, right? So Russia historically had bad governance, people who were bad at governing, and today it has probably the worst one. It is a conglomerate of Chekists and organized crime people who basically succeeded in state capture in 1999, and the strategy of them stabilizing the regime and keeping the population from this unnecessary thoughts, why these guys are becoming billionaires while we live in relative poverty, right? They've been kept away from these thoughts. Why should we tolerate these guys with the usual historical tactics of scaring them with this hostile enemies all around. This is a besieged fortress, Russia, since medieval times, I guess, right? And the new one is making Russia great again. And yes, unfortunately, I agree, the large majority of Russians agree to basically sacrifice the quality of life if their rulers make Russia great again. So, unfortunately, I do not believe in helping Ukrainian frontline by destabilizing the regime from within. I do not believe in Ukrainian partisans doing anything within Russia, at least changing the regime. The regime can be only changed if Russia is defeated in Ukraine. As much as Russians historically love their tyrants, they do not like those who do not succeed. So they don't like losers. Well, I would be happy to refer you to my article written 2021, available on our website. It's called The Sources of Russian Misconduct. Not to be confused with the article of the same title, which was published 1 year later in Foreign Affairs.
Georgi, before asking you to join me in thanking distinguished speakers, I just remind you that after the end of our discussions, there will be a demonstration of the film about the Georgian volunteers fighting in Ukraine, supported by the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, and I strongly recommend to stay and to join us. This hall. And now join me in thanking our distinguished speakers for the very free and in-depth remarks and thoughts, and of course join me in wishing Ukraine a victory and defeating Russia. And Slava Ukraini, Heroyam Slava. Thank you very much.
I understand it's very emotional because I think I've watched this movie already 110 times, but still it's very challenging for me, and I assume for all of you, to keep emotions. And there's very rational and very rational things in the movie, but emotions, I think, makes stronger for our standing. Now I want to ask Shorana and Georgi to join us and to share their experience and feelings while they're making movie. Would be very interesting to tell the audience what was your main motivation? Why did you undertake this project, and what was the story you wanted to tell while working on the documentary?
Salome, you're absolutely right. Every time I'm watching the movie, I have the same feelings, very emotional. And thank you very much for giving us opportunity to screen a movie today. And actually, what's the main idea of this film to make was to depict some human stories from the battlefield. and to tell the stories of Georgians. But though these stories are about Georgians, but this is about Ukraine and about Ukrainians' fight against Russia. So that's only just Georgians here, and this story is a kind of channel how we want to depict the history and to preserve that history, and also to have our part in this very important moment in the world history, Georgians' part. So I think this is what we wanted, but also we wanted to think about these people. So they are fighting today, and what is their future when war ends? So what is their role? What is their place in this society, actually? So that was my initial thoughts, but actually what we have as a result, this is much bigger, actually. And I'm really very proud, and I would like to thank first of all you, Ebert Foundation, for entrusting us, and also I would like to express my great gratitude towards my colleague and my very dear friend Georgi, to be so brave, courageous, and just to go to Ukraine for 2 weeks. The crew was there, and all these pictures, all these images, they are mostly from direct interaction with the battlefield, with our fighters. So I think, and that happened just last year. This time we were working on organizing this trip, this mission, let me say. That was not easy. So there were lots of risks, and first of all, we were very worried about our friends, but everything worked, and now we have this, and I hope that we will make another film about the victory we are speaking today all day, and yeah, so this is what we wanted to say, just to think about human beings. You see, I mean, this film is incredible because we feel the war, and what this our fighters are saying. Everything was kind of blasting. Everything is, and there was something about environment, and this beautiful country is just over cultivated by this military machine, and this is what we wanted to, I mean, to have in history, and to say that Georgians somehow contributed to fight these evils. So thank you very much for staying with us, and with that I would like to pass the words to Georgi, and he would add.
Georgi, what would have been this unique perspective you think you've captured through this movie, and what was the main challenges you encountered while working on the documentary?
So in very few words, it's a war. Nobody knows what happens after 20 seconds, you know. So it's quite hard. It's quite difficult. So we have a meeting with guys of Georgian Legion. Unfortunately, we could not catch some other guys who also are fighting in Ukraine, partisan groups or non-partisan groups also. There are fortune soldiers also, and guys who are serving in Ukraine's armed forces, for example, in 72nd Brigade. So it's quite difficult, really, it's quite difficult, and only what we know about those guys is they are serving as a part of the military unit of GUR and armed forces of Ukraine. So what can we catch also? It's emotions, it's willing of winning, and willing to come back.
And now we'll be very glad if you are willing to share your thoughts, comments, questions regarding the movie, or emotions. It would be very sad. But I understand it's very tired. You are very tired after the quite busy, though very interesting program.
Thank you. This is not the question, definitely. This is to express the appreciation to my longtime friend Georgi Svitawa and to Sharena. Thank you. So doing such an amazing work, you know, because we are all talking here in Georgia about Georgian volunteers, about their sacrifice, and it is essential. So the existential importance to learn for the Georgians from the first hand, from the Georgian volunteers who say themselves the messages I said today, you know, that I've heard the same, that we are not here only for Ukraine, you know, we have given the oath to Georgia and we will keep fighting for Ukraine and for Georgia for the future. So I appreciate, thank you very much and wish you success, safety in your future endeavors, and I'm more than sure that you will keep showing this film, you know, and to the wider Georgian population and society. It is a very important tool to counter the disinformation, the wrong narratives, and the images which some are trying to create about the Georgian volunteers and Georgian fighters. Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's not a question, it's just, you know, my emotions that I'm watching this documentary for, I think, third time, but cannot stop. You know, the emotions is the same. Thank you very much, Shorin and Georgi, and everyone who has contributed. No, I think it's very important, not only for us now to watch it, but also, as you mentioned, for the history, because many years ago, when I, you know, watching on TV during the Abkhazia war, and watching this terrible scene of the airplane crashing, blowing up, and knowing that there are people whom you know in that airplane, you know, that image would never disappear. And that is, you know, all the time I, you know, watched this documentary, I had those memories coming up, and this is also us to remember, you know, always what does it mean to be in a fight with Russia, and what are the consequences for human lives, and this is a really, you know, really emotional, because I have never mentioned this maybe earlier, but you know, when your family member is coming alive from the war and you are not ashamed, but you know, feel sorry that, you know, your friend's one is not. That's a feeling that is really devastating, and you know, and I see all of this in this, you know, the movie fighters talking about their friends who have passed away. And also important is that a couple years ago, on I think 25th anniversary of Georgia-Ukrainian diplomatic relations, I think it was in the Ministry of Defense on Aghmashenebele, there was a screening of this movie about Ukrainian helicopter flyers. Yes, rescue operation in Svaneti, you know. And also it was not easy. It was not easy because these people were also risking their lives, you know, working hard. And, you know, this, at that time, there was no, you know, opportunity to make, you know, more of the documentaries. But all those shots are very important, you know, for us. Sorry for this quite emotional intervention, but you know, the movie gives the, you know, the ground for that. Thank you.
Thank you for this movie. We as a Embassy of Ukraine always try to grateful for this, for you guys, for these Georgian volunteers who are fighting with our guys and sisters in Ukraine, and this movie is show us these emotions, their thoughts, their motives to participate in this war, to help us, to help our people, and of course, as a citizen of Irpin, I'm grateful for the liberation of my city, for liberation of Kiev region as well, and I think that Georgians need to know more about these guys, about these heroes, not only such some news about them, about their, fortunately, death, fortunately, but still about what they did, what they want to do, and their future, and their thoughts about future of Georgia, future of Ukraine. Thank you once again for your film. Thank you.
I just wanted to add something. So there is a person in the movie who just lost his son, Archil Khoperian. And when I first time watched this, and I was absolutely shocked with the empathy and kindness of this person who lost his son in the war. So I think that sometimes for us it's very kind of strange speaking about honor and things like that, because it's a little bit out of fashion, yeah? But you see that this everything, this honor, this love, solidarity, empathy. I mean, these soldiers, we speak about Georgians, but they very well represent the spirit of Ukrainian army as well. So this is what we want to say. And I think that that's so important, and it gives me hope that this war can be and must be won. So this is what I wanted to add.
Thank you everyone. It was a long day, and to sum up this very interesting event, thank you again for being with us. And just to add, while we are presenting this movie in Brussels, our friends and allies from Western countries, also our dear colleagues from Ukrainian embassy there, just told us the thing which was also very interesting, also a bit surprising for us, but the reality. They told us we did not know that much Georgians were fighting in Ukraine. And the aim of this, yes, in Georgia it's very well known, but we lack substance. There is wrongful information about those soldiers, and outside of Georgia, at international audience, they simply don't know that the biggest foreign legion, it's lost somewhere in between politics, that biggest foreign legion are Georgians who are fighting, serving and dying in their own merits, but in a very challenging and difficult circumstances. So we hope that we would kind of reach out. Of course, it can be done best because there is always a room for improvement, but with this movie we hope that some kind of outreach is possible in domestic as well as in international audience. Thank you very much. Slava Ukraini!